Captain's Personal Log, Stardate 3124.1. Science Officer DJRONNIG and I have been given the unenviable task by Starfleet Command. It's to review a current and past time displacement by the Starship Enterprise under the command of Captain James Tiberius Kirk. Commander DJRONNIG is well-known data analysis around Starfleet Command. He is in line for a command of his own. But until that command comes, he and I will be analyzing this particular mission that sent the Enterprise back to Earth's own past. Not just Earth's own past, but the 1960s, a volatile time for the world's history. A time where there was a certain missile crisis going on. And, Mr. DJRONNIG, what do you have to say about tonight's episode? Tomorrow is Yesterday, which was
Well,
episode number 19 of the original series' first season.
I sure hope I don't run afoul with temporal investigations. You know how sometimes you say the wrong thing, temporal investigation comes down on you. Next thing you know, you got like 5 guys in your office interviewing you about the same situation to make sure you're not lying about the inconsistencies. So I'm making sure to put on this chronometer that was issued to me by Starfleet Temporal Investigations so that we may properly file this report.
Now, according to the ship's own data logs, central logs, and analyzing crew logs, they say that nothing has changed so far.
Mm-hmm.
But we will be the ones to determine as to whether or not any discrepancies have occurred in time. Now, some of our highly regarded science officers and also admirals, Lady Mist, has already analyzed some of the data, and so far has not uncovered any discrepancies within the timeline. As far as she can tell, history has not been altered, but we're still looking through the rest of the Enterprise's data logs to see if they match with those at Starfleet Command. I also wanted to say hello to Lieutenant Commander Dances with Owls, Chief Security at Starfleet Command. But welcome one and all to episode 2 of The Avenger Continues. Thank you for going along with this little role play I was doing at the beginning. Tonight, we are going to watch and discuss an episode that is near and dear to me. The episode, as you know, is Tomorrow is Yesterday. Now, for me, I remember first seeing this episode when I was 7 years old. So we're talking 1985 is when I first saw this episode. Star Trek was still in syndication. There was no Next Generation as of yet. And I remember turning on my dad's small little TV he had in the bedroom that he and my mom slept in, the master bedroom, and watching the episode for the first time and just being fascinated by the series itself. And one character I grew to love and respect was that of Spock. DJ, what are your memories of Tomorrow is Yesterday?
Well, I caught it on the Channel 11 Star Trek Marathon. That's WPIX Channel 11 in New York. And every year they'd have this momentous occasion, a Star Trek Marathon. And so that's where I first caught it. And I think I caught it like 2 years in a row. One year I caught it in passing. The following year I caught it like in its entirety. And, at the time, I didn't know what to make of it. First time I saw it, like I was 12. So, but in subsequent viewings, I definitely comprehended it a heck of a lot more. And I'm sure as we go along, I'll have quite a bit to comment about some of the things you're going to see from, human space flight of the late 1960s, at least as of the 1960s. I forget exactly where this is set, but I'm sure that we'll get a better idea if you might even know better than I in this case. But the idea of missile nuclear platforms.
1966 is when it said. So same year as when the series debuted.
Okay, that's a relief. I was worried it was going to be like 1990 or something like that. Like Khan 1996. I was worried it was going to be something like that. I was like, but that's good. Okay, so that's about right. At the time, that's something they would have anticipated. So as we go along, we're going to stumble into some plot points that back then would have made sense. And for the most part, I think that it's hard to call the future when you're in the present, or it's hard to call the near future sometimes. That's why it's always good to try to do something that's further into the future so that you don't get caught making mistakes. But overall, I mean, that is how they would have done it. I mean, if you need to launch a large payload like what they're talking about in this episode, a Saturn V rocket is the rocket to do it on. But that being besides the point, there's a lot of cool little Easter eggs in here. You'll see
Hmm.
glimpses of the NASA Deep Space Network. You'll see F-104 starfighters scrambling because he needs something fast to catch up with a Starfleet ship from 300 years in the future. So
Hmm.
yeah, this is a real treat of an episode. As you said, this turned you on to Trek because I mean, you're seeing like a guy from the present day experiencing the Enterprise, something that I'm sure when I was younger, at least, I dreamed of being beamed aboard the Enterprise to
Hmm.
just be that guy who's like, "Welcome to the Enterprise." I mean, that is the ultimate experience right there. Screw the Galactic Star Cruiser, man. This is where it's at.
You see this episode for the first time. You see that meeting between Captain Christopher, although there is something interesting, and when we get to it as we watch the end credits, you'll notice that there's something that was a mistake, and I want to see how many people catch it in the
Oh,
credits. Because, like I said, they refer to the character as Captain Christopher, but there's something in there
ooh.
that you'll notice. You'll definitely notice. I mean, it's hard not to notice it once you see it. And I posted this earlier on my X feed. Yes, this is my original VHS copy of Tomorrow is Yesterday. That's how much this episode means to me. It is the foundation of my Trekdom. Without it, I don't know if I would be a Star Trek fan. So that's the thing. We have episodes, those of us old enough that are our favorite episodes, and we bought them on VHS. DJ, do you have any VHS tapes
I
of
have a
any of
lot.
your?
Yeah, I got a lot from recorded Star Trek marathons. Whenever they were running
Mhm.
on TV, man, we just put that tape in the recorder, put it in EP mode, and get that 6 hours per tape.
Yeah.
And that's how I watched a lot of reruns. But occasionally, episodes that were not covered in that marathon, we certainly did rent at the local video store. And mostly, though, all I have are incomplete portions of the Star Trek 6-pack from the 90s. That VHS copy that has the beautiful picture of the Enterprise 1701, I guess, A. That one where you have the 6 VHS
Hmm.
tapes, Star Treks 1
Yeah,
through
yeah.
6.
One side, it just has Star Trek the motion picture, Star Trek the Wrath of Khan, but the other
Hmm.
side, when you put all the cassette boxes together, it forms the Enterprise.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. And I thought it's just a nice box to have part of it. And ironically, my copy of the motion picture is in the white box. Then I got Star Trek's like 2, 3, and the 6 from the triple pack or some weird combination like that. But, I got a scattered collection of VHSs, and it's ironic I never got in on the DVDs or Blu rays. But I got to say, at some point, I do want to get like TOS on Blu ray, especially the version like
Well,
that Stone Loki mentioned where it's got both versions on it.
yeah, yeah, and that's what I have, but I also have other DVD compilations that actually have different episodes on,
Hmm.
and
Different?
yeah, yeah. In these compilations, the one I have in particular is time travel because I knew tomorrow's yesterday would be on that pack. So they came out with time travel. They came out with a Borg one. They came out with one on Klingons. They came out with one on Q. So it was different episodes from the original series. Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. And of course, if it dealt with Q, you had the Deep Space Nine episode he was on, some Next Generation episodes, and some Voyager episodes. But
I got you.
on those, it has the original standard definition versions of the episodes. And yes, like on the Blu-rays for the original series, season 1, 2, and 3, there is a capability on that Blu-ray where you can watch it in its original form, or you can watch the remaster version. Some episodes look great in the remastered version. Other episodes, like the one we're watching tonight, we're watching it exactly how I saw it before. Exactly as you see behind DJRONNIG with the Enterprise going up. With those 1960s special effects. And you were talking about the Blu-ray set, and let me just go to Amazon real quick, and we can see how much those Blu-ray sets are running now as compared to when they were first released. I mean, it's been since 2009, since season 1 of the original series came out on Blu-ray.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't make my eyeballs bleed, because I mean, look, sometimes I have something that I get unofficially, and then I like it. I'm happy to buy it. If I see there's good craftsmanship, nobody who makes a unofficial copy available does the due diligence to make sure it's the best possible quality. And in a way, that's a good thing, because that gives me incentive to purchase it on physical media. And I still watch it on my own terms. But like I said, if I see value in it, I'm happy to vote with my dollars to pay for the thing. And I think having both versions, that's one thing that would annoy me, to have like only the remaster. I definitely want that flexibility where I can choose which one to watch, and that's what I have now. But if I buy the Blu-ray, yeah, I think even the non-remastered one might be 1080p. It just doesn't have the new VFX, which is exactly perfect. Give me a film scan and call it a day.
I mean, these are the original releases of season 1, season 2, and you got season 3. But look, this is a lot cheaper.
Wow.
Than they were when they first came out.
That's very true. So that's one of the reasons why. And I would have had been either earning less money or not even been employed at one point, and it would have been off the table at any higher of a price. But $18.99.
$18.99 for season 1, $23.98 for season 2, and then you got season 3 here. That's $17.89.
That's really good. Yeah.
Or, although I would honestly get them separately.
Yeah.
As compared to getting them in this pack right here.
Oh, I see. Especially, price-wise. Now, look, if there's something they include in that pack that's better, right now all I see is larger boxes. It doesn't actually look like, but I would read the specs. Sometimes you'll find out, like I remember when I bought Lex on DVD, there was 3 versions, and one of them was $300, and that was the one that, like, if I wanted to make a proper, put it in my library, it would be perfect. But the reality was I wasn't willing to spend $300 at that time. I said, you know what? I'll take my chances with the cheap one and I'll upscale it. So I went on eBay, spent $40, scanned it, whatever, copied it, and did what I could to digitally upscale it. It came out okay. It wasn't like great, but sometimes you got to make these compromises. But these prices here, maybe I find out the $100, whatever it is, imbues some kind of advantage like that, or you pay more for it and you get less. That's interesting. That says DVD on it for $49.
I was gonna say, look at the DVD price here for $49.96.
Oh,
honestly, I can't speak for you. I can't speak for anybody watching right now, but I have no problem picking up a DVD set that's only $50. Especially when it's a good show like the original series.
And sometimes, a DVD version will be set in stone. It's not like, sometimes they have certain revisions to things in the Blu-ray era. So if you, do your research, you might find there's a reason to stick with the DVD. But at the very least, I think it'll make the cut. It'll be at least, $480, maybe 480p, 720p. I hope, but like,
Mhm.
that's one thing that concerns me with DVDs when they're not P, when they're like 480i or 720i. That's a little annoying, but for people who just watch it on disc, it's inconsequential. And like
Mhm.
I said, like you're not missing out on any visual experience at that rate. Roger
No,
Perry as Major Christopher,
yes.
says Dances
And,
with Flowers.
and you know what? Dances of Owls brings it up already. That's discrepancy. They call him Captain Christopher in the episode, but in the credits, it says Major Christopher. But you'll
Hmm.
you'll hear it. You'll see it when we get into the episode. Transporter room. Let's
Hmm.
give these fine folks the transporter coordinates so that they can join us in watching tonight's episode. All right, so folks watching on YouTube, there are the transporter coordinates. Folks over on Rumble, here are the transporter coordinates. And folks over on X, I am getting you the transporter coordinates right now. I just actually have to log into X. I did not do that before the stream, so just give me a second. And here are the transporter coordinates for anyone watching on X. You will have to verify yourself, just a security measure. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are ready, I'll wait for some folks to filter in here and then we will start. And there you see the starfighter. That's the first thing you see in this episode.
Mm-hmm. Cool looking plane.
Oh yeah. I actually went to a hobby shop and
Oh,
found a model of that when I was a kid after seeing this episode.
cool.
See, what was great about this episode too is you had folks who worked on the show who served in World War II and Korea and in the military in general, so they knew the kind of dialogue they needed to put in to make it authentic. And there
That is
she
true.
is,
Uh,
NCC 1701. No bloody A, B, C, or D.
there we go. Well, the quality's pretty good on yours. I just synchronized my copy with yours, and yeah, they look pretty close.
I did what I could. And see, there's one thing that Aaron and I were talking about because when he does come on, he wants to talk about the Doomsday Machine.
Uh huh.
And
Good
we
one.
were talking about things that we liked about the remaster version, excuse me, and things that we don't like about the remastered version. We wish they actually did shot for shot for the exterior.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, yeah. That's one of the things. Sometimes they get it right with these remasters. They really try to be faithful to the original when possible.
So again, imagine being 7 years old, seeing this episode, and as a kid going, "What's going on?" Of course, there's Uhura.
That was a wild night.
Wow, party on the Enterprise. Hello, Lavros. How are you doing tonight? If you'd like to watch along with us, I just put the Cosme link into the chat if you'd like to watch. And see, what I like about this dialogue, DJ, is they're letting the audience know how they got to the past.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh. I was trying to enter orbit around the planet before the show in a space simulator with the Enterprise, but I kept getting shot into the sun for some reason.
Slingshot effect.
Yeah, like every time I turn on my impulse engines, I'd be at the sun like that.
Hmm. And they're not wasting a lot of time giving you this information. They're not dragging it out. They're straight and to the point.
Mm-hmm. I made sure we're getting right into the action here. We established what's going on in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We got some mystique now. We got a fighter pilot. What's gonna happen here? I mean, how this can impact the timeline. Him seeing this.
Mm-hmm. And we learn about that later on in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though this is the 1960s, that's pretty good for a television series with a low budget.
Oh yeah, I even saw some footage where it's the Enterprise in front of a blue screen. I was able to use Power Director on my phone to like edit that, and
Mm-hmm.
it just they had some form of chroma key back then too, and video compositing with film. I can imagine how challenging, or rotoscoping, whatever they call it. I mean, that's an expensive operation. This episode, especially these are clips that might be one-off shots.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely costly and probably a lot of work for the guys doing it, but they did it. Ooh.
And see, notice how they're speculating that the aircraft has nuclear weapons.
Which I would say normally would be improbable, but perhaps at this point in the timeline, maybe they do have some tactical devices on there. I'm gonna guess their sensors couldn't tell.
Mm-hmm. And with the Enterprise being in the condition that it is, maybe the data is
Yeah,
just slow at getting to the computer.
that's a good point, and I find that to be completely acceptable. It's not a stretch.
The fact that they have enough auxiliary power to use the transporters is one thing. Now also the tractor beam is another.
Mm-hmm. It tore his fighter jet apart. It's not made of titanium. It
No.
doesn't have a structural integrity field. I think there was a captain pins on him. If I remember how I was looking at a video, a list of who commands a division, who commands a platoon, and
Mhm.
I think a captain runs a company.
And as soon as you're able to come in, dances with owls, go ahead.
It looks like a captain insignia. It's the two bars.
Yeah, it is the captain's insignia.
Mhm.
But you want to know something about the original series? I've always loved that shot, especially when the camera's focused on Kirk, where you see the shadows with the lights right on his eyes. I've
Oh
always loved that
yeah,
shot.
it is definitely an interesting lighting technique.
Hmm.
And then what they did in the episode when he had the evil double, that was clever lighting too.
Yeah, it was. No problem. Mhm. Well, think about it. Christopher's from the 1960s. You don't see a lot of women in the military.
This is true.
And there you learn how many Constitution class starships there are.
I always love the little bits of world building they can get into there.
Hmm. He's not sure if he's buying what Kirk is telling him. And this is the interaction I've always loved.
Uh-oh.
Christopher's never believed in little green men, and neither has Spock. And I don't know about you, DJ, but I've always
My headphones.
loved about the original series. You can hear from the intercom system what's going on in the other departments. And, and I love how Spock establishes something that's used in Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise when it comes to time travel. You go back, you must not interfere with what happened during that time in order for the future that they know to still exist.
Creates quite a quandary. It's like we don't even know what happens exactly, and I mean they kind of have an idea in Star Trek lore, but you still don't want to find out.
No.
Some starbase.
Same. Mm. And Signal 14 computers are still used on Starfleet vessels, even in the Next Generation time.
Oh yeah, I think I wonder if that's the episode with the isolinear chips when they visited that planet. Well, they visited many planets. If my OBS crashes, I'm still watching the episode and I'll be popping back in within a minute.
Okay. And we are now faced with the dilemma of having an interaction with Christopher and his being on the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
They're trapped.
Well, as long as they don't have to go to Almeida to see those nuclear vessels.
I'm afraid they're a number of years too early for that.
Yep, this is true too. Dun, 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 dun.
How could you not like those original effects?
Oh yeah, just beautifully done. I mean, some people they just say, "Oh, this is dated. I can't watch this," and I'd say they're a little bit spoiled. They don't understand what went into it. But
Mm-hmm.
aside from the fact that people would be watching this on a black and white television of a smaller size at the time, it did look darn good in the 1980s in color. Although my father has told me that when they had these on TV, a lot of colors looked really off, and it was, I believe, either Turner or one of these companies. They did some colorization and restoration work on either. I don't know if they did analog work. I don't know if they did it to the film negatives or what, but they did something that kind of carried us over through the 90s with pretty good looking episodes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't wait, and this will probably be a special, longer edition of the Adventure Continues, a Star Trek discussion, when we watch and discuss not just the trouble with tribbles, but trials and tribulations.
Oh yeah.
And how well they were able to put Chief O'Brien and Dr. Bashir into the one scene where Kirk's asking Chekhov, "I want to know who threw the first punch."
That was one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's like I can figure out how to do that in DaVinci Resolve today. I don't know how you do it in Avid or how you would do it in whatever technology they were using at that particular time. But I imagine it took some smart people to do it.
I know for some of the episode they built a portion of the bridge sets and then had green screens and blue screens.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that does make sense. Yeah, you'd have realistic elements, and then you'd be compositing and mixing it up.
And still, you get that classic banter between Bones and Spock, and
this guy's witnessing it. He's like,
Mhm.
wow, I'm watching a country doctor exchanging snarky comments with an alien.
with a pointy-eared, green-blooded Vulcan. Not yet.
Ah, that's smart. That's a way to motivate him.
Finding out a little bit of his own future, and that he's going to have a son, and it was going to be significant in the Federation's history.
I mean, that'll motivate you not to mess up with the timeline.
Yep.
Sun dogs. I learned about those recently.
Hmm.
It's like when you're in the Arctic and there's a certain time of the year where the sun is over the horizon, but it looks like
Mhm.
you see the way the light scatters. You're seeing three suns in one corner of the sky, and it's basically an optical illusion. But it's been documented way back, like 1840s.
Okay. I never knew that.
Yeah, I learned it while researching that doomed expedition to the through the Northwest Passage.
You're exactly right, Dances with Owls. This is where Christopher becomes valuable to them because he knows the layout of the base.
Spock is like,
Fascinating. They just know the right timing to beam down without anybody spotting them. Gotta love that transporter technology. Scan the coordinates, and you can see if anyone's around, and if you're in an isolated area. And That's all part of using the ship's sensors.
Oh yeah, there's literally an astrogator, which is between the console where Sulu and Chekhov sits. There's this big orange circular plotting device.
Mhm.
They use it for plotting courses. That's the astrogator, which is sort of like, astrogation would be like the root term, or like so navigation. Astrogation is when you're in space, I guess. And so they have an astrogator in the transporter room, right in the middle of that
Yes.
panel. So it stands to be reason you're using similar technology to dial in those coordinates.
I mean, that's what they do in, the episodes City on the Edge of Forever, and they acquire different clothes, but, we've seen it in Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, where they do manufacture the clothes. I mean, they can manufacture the clothes in Next Generation when they're going onto the holodeck
Oh
by
yeah,
using the replicator.
I remember on Enterprise. I think on Enterprise they practically had a historian on the ship who would figure out what textiles to put together. Pre-replicators and stuff. But
Hmm.
by the original series they had an easier go of it, I'm sure.
And it's good to see low spec Linux gaming over on the Rumble
Rumble.
side. And I also want to thank Dork Girl for following the Rumble channel. Thank you very much.
I should open up the Rumble chat. I put the Rumble chat on my stream the other day because 2 weeks ago, low spec Linux Gaming shamed me for not having the Rumble chat on screen. Well, he didn't shame me. He just kind of called me out.
Well, I have it set up here on EVBucks where it'll show me who's on the Rumble side, but it's not coming up tonight. So I do have the Rumble chat up on another screen so I can see if anybody shows up.
Yep, I got him side by side now too.
All right, I'll look into Social Stream Ninja.
That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. Why would they not change clothes before beaming down? Perhaps they figured they'd bonk someone over the head and steal their uniform, but that is a good point.
Hmm. And also, for this mission, maybe they thought they were just going to go in, get what they needed to get, and get out. But as you can see, that's not the case. They were caught. Both Kirk and
Mm-hmm.
Sulu. All right, I'll definitely look into it and try to get it set up. I don't know how soon I'll have it set up, but I'll definitely look into it and do what needs to be done so I can
I mean,
see all the chats at the same time.
I'll try anything. If that's what unifies the chats, yeah, I'd check it
Yeah.
out too.
Okay. So it's just a browser source. Got it.
Oh, cool.
He's frozen there on the transporter pad in the chamber. I mean, how would any of us react if we were suddenly beamed up from one location to another?
Yeah, especially with no benefit of having seen Star Trek before. This guy, he's like middle aged kind of, so he's really like taken aback by it. You know, he's not reading those comic books like the kids are doing.
No, he's not. Probably not even aware of a lot of the comics that were out during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the earlier comics he was familiar with, but
That's true too. That's a fair point.
now they're trying to sneak out. He is like, it's like, oh man, what is this? Where am I? Who are you people? What are you doing here? What am I doing here? We'll have another tape to get. Yeah, I gotta be honest. I probably would too. Be like, okay, so where's Ryza? Let's go to Ryza. Come on, let's go.
Yeah.
You make a good point, Dancing with Battles. It was state of the art at the time. And how far we've come in the almost 60 years since the original series started. Next year will be the 60th anniversary.
Modern.
Unless you wanted to count last year as the 60th anniversary with The Cage. But since that was only aired as part of the menagerie, a lot of people don't count it.
I mean, you know, it may not be part of the history for the average fan, but I mean, it is relevant to the chronology of the story of how Star Trek became.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm getting up there too. You know, one of my other favorite characters of the original series is
Sulu? I'm just taking a shot in the dark here.
Lady. He works in engineering. And he has a bottle of really, really old Scotch whiskey.
Of course, I know who. Chekhov. Nah, I'm kidding. But Scotty was always one of my favorites too. I mean, you know, he was whimsical. He was interesting. I already liked Geordi back then, so of course seeing the counterpart to Geordi 30 years earlier, 20 years earlier, was kind of interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was my first introduction to anything Star Trek, was Next Generation, you know? And TOS was like this weird thing from a bygone era when I was like 11 years old. I'm like, what is this? I mean, I kind of knew what it was, but it still was kind of something else, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, when Next Generation started airing, I thought it was okay. I was
Mm-hmm.
still loyal to the original series. And then
Yep.
I saw the episode Yesterday's Enterprise. I'm all, okay, Next Generation is getting better.
That was that did they did really pick things up there.
Mhm. And I've always felt that it was season 2 of Deep Space Nine where they started finding their footing.
What's this? It must be the radiation. I
Yeah,
think by the time Chekhov, yeah,
the voyage home.
Scotty Scotty is the shiznit, and I am going to uphold your free speech by clicking show. Can you believe the YouTube chat blocked Dances with Owls' message about Scotty being the shiznit? I
That's
mean,
ridiculous.
Scotty is the shit. That is a statement of fact.
I mean, whether it's Scotty in engineering or when he has to take command of the Enterprise, especially, excuse me, when that ambassador is on board and tells Scotty, you need to lower the deflector shields. And Scotty pretty much tells him, as long as I'm in command, these deflector shields stay up.
Yep. It's a tricky deal. Sometimes,
You don't have to apologize to me, Dances with Owls. It's you two.
Oh, yeah.
I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, we're cool. He's cool with this. I'm cool with it too. Like, I don't block many people in the when I have a wrench. I'm usually more times than not allowing messages through.
Mm-hmm. My main rule on my channels is just be cool.
Yeah.
Don't be a jerk. Yeah, it's YouTube censorship, low spec, as you're saying.
Yeah, I see you. I see you, low spec Linux gaming. I'm watching the Rumble chat today, so I can say hi to you. What's up? It's good to see you, low spec. He's been doing some cool Star Wars games lately, by the way. I don't mean to be putting a plug mid Star Trek stream.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, but they're good Star Wars streams, and he's playing a version of Dark Forces, I believe, with a modified or newer engine, and it looks beautiful and it works, which I can imagine that's half the battle.
I know they had some HD mods for the original Dark Forces. I played the remastered version last year.
Yup. Same. I played the remaster, and I'm hoping they come out with the Dark Forces too. But if they don't, I think I'll survive. I think I will manage. With whatever exists.
Mm-hmm. He just puts in the data card and there's your chicken soup, sir. Complete with utensils.
Oh yeah, it did have utensils. I can imagine those come out of a dispenser, or they're recycling something like cardboard utensils. Well, maybe not cardboard, but the idea of having something that resembles a floppy disk. And I mean, I know that they didn't really have 5 1/4 floppies. They may have had 10-inch floppies at the time, although I don't think they were even out yet. But I can imagine food being on a floppy, like you put it in, it's got like the protein in there, whatever is in there, and it adds water. I mean, especially soup. I mean, soup could fit on a floppy disk. We have packets of soup, Lipton, right? So
yeah,
how hard is it for a machine to be designed to accept the mix and then to add hot water? And it seems that the replicators on the TOS, I mean, it's a mystery to some extent, but sometimes I think they do run on a simpler methodology.
Yeah, I mean, the food synthesizing units on the original Enterprise weren't as sophisticated as the replicators that they have by the time of Next Generation. And Losbeck is saying Jedi Outcast and the fan remaster of Mysteries of Sith and Dark Forces 2 rocks have vids.
Yup.
If you want to post a link to your vids, Losbeck, you can. And I'll share it with everybody.
Yep.
Spock is using something I don't use. Stealth.
Mm-hmm. Stealth is optional.
Mm-hmm. Nighty night. Very logical, Mr. Spock. But no, you mentioned Star Wars. I will be hosting a watch party on the 25th of A New Hope, or
Ooh.
as it's commonly known to all of us from a certain generation or two, just Star Wars. Unfortunately, I don't have the original theatrical version.
I gotta see what I have. I did obtain a copy of the theatrical cut. I don't know if I have all of them or just A New Hope, but when I found out it existed, I hunted it down because I was like, that sounds cool, you know. Especially when some nerd on YouTube was making a case, he's saying, hey, look, this is the movie that won Academy Awards. So from a historical point of view, it matters that we have that version available.
Mm-hmm.
And so various nerds got together and compiled things from Blu-ray, DVD, wherever they can get any given scene. If they had a piece of film stock, I don't know if they went that far, but whatever they had to, had, and whatever they could obtain in order to like splice it together digitally, they did it. And they even did like some compositing work. They did some like almost like Da Vinci Magic Mask, where they like it didn't have a complete scene, but they knew enough about the scene where they had a VHS version of that scene. They did a lot of interesting stuff with that. And in the end, they have a version that is literally what you would have saw in the theater back when the movie debuted, and what you probably would have saw on a TV movie. And weirdly enough, George Lucas was constantly tweaking it. I mean, you'd think the special edition is where it started.
No, he was even tweaking it after its first release when he added A New Hope to the title.
Yep. Oh yeah, very true. And with Empire, I remember learning about during the special edition, they had the transparent cockpit on the snowspeeder, and I went to look for it, and I couldn't see it in my trilogy from the late '90s. So then I went and I found a TV recording of the VHS, a TV, they played it on a channel, on one of the broadcast networks, and that one did have the glitch in there where they're flying the snowspeeder towards the AT-AT walkers, and sure enough, you see the legs of the AT-AT walkers right through the dashboard panel of that snowspeeder.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like that's a less important thing to preserve, but it's still kind of interesting to see these things.
It's still the film in its original form, and
Yep. And most people wouldn't have noticed something like that. You'd have to be looking for that, and that's the thing. It captivated people's imaginations despite stuff like that.
And Losbeck is saying he has the 1080p version of the 4K 77 Project Star Wars.
There we are. That's the one.
And he also mentions the Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight fan remaster. Link in the description. Okay.
Oh, cool. Cool.
All right. I will share that with everybody over on the YouTube and X side.
Heck yeah.
And if you're not following Low Spec over on Rumble, do him a favor and follow him.
Oh yeah.
And this is something here that would come back in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Slingshot effect. And that's one thing I like about Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, the continuity. Okay, Slingshot worked in the episode Tomorrow's Yesterday. Let's use it for The Voyage Home. Now, in the remastered version, you actually see the Enterprise going around the sun.
Uh-huh. I used to wonder how they can keep time like that, and I believe you could do it using the positions of the stars, and of
Mm-hmm.
course the alignment of the planets. So just like on the Apollo missions, they had a Apollo telescope mount, and they
Yep.
had a marine sextant, or at least a modified version of a marine sextant, mounted to the spacecraft that would be used in the same manner as mariners, where they would, measure the stars, figure out the coordinates of a boat or submarine, depending on what era you're talking about. And you could do this in space. And they tested it. It worked because they had the Apollo navigational computer or
Mm-hmm.
guidance computer, and I think that was more of a backup. They used mostly ground-based telemetry. In fact, we're going to stumble into that at various scenes. In fact, I mixed this up with another episode. I was mixing this up with Gary 7. And in that episode, you do see. In fact, that's what I was saying at the beginning of this episode. I was mixing it up with Gary 7, talking about, that's a different episode. But um, that, also has, stuff from this era, basically. You have Saturn V rockets. That's the one I was referencing earlier
Mm-hmm.
by accident.
Well, we'll definitely watch and discuss Gary 7 at some point, too. And Tim, good to see you tonight, brother.
Yes, sir. Good to see you, Tib. That's a good thing about recapping episodes. Sometimes like episodes blur together if I haven't watched them in a while.
I'm the same way. When you have 735 episodes that contain the original series, the animated series, Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, even I get mixed up.
Yep. $498th air something.
Airbase group.
Thank you. Nothing to see here.
Back when Pluto was still a planet.
Hey, it's still a planet. It just so happens to be a dwarf planet.
Mm-hmm.
I never got emotional about it. I don't know why people got like. I mean, I get it. It's a childhood thing, I guess, but it's like one of these trivialities. Like, if anything, I'm glad it's not a planet because then you'd have to have like 10 more planets.
Mm-hmm. See, with the cameras shaking, what they would have done in Next Generation times, they would have had the actors moving around their seats. I mean, yeah,
No,
they're moving around now, but you know how it is in Next Generation. Shaky
yeah.
cam, and they're rocking back and forth. And
I love that clip where they stabilize it in like modern editing software, and that just like becomes a comedy routine right there.
mm-hmm. Now, I will admit that last exterior shot where the Enterprise is just moving up and down, I did chuckle when I was watching this episode for the first time.
Oh yeah, just like either Doomsday Machine or another episode, the one with the Romulans, Enemy Within was it? Well, anyway, no, not Enemy Within. You know the Romulan episode. with the high energy plasma, and there's a scene where the Enterprise tilts side to side, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like the exterior view.
And that's just wolves. Owls. Sorry. I said wolves and I meant owls. My bad. But he said, I light up my science fair project. It is a planet. Well, for those of us that grew up in, 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, we were told it was a planet. It was the 9th planet in our solar system. Now I'm going to try to pause it right at the credits where you see Roger Perry, Major Christopher, although they kept referring to him as Captain in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that was interesting.
When you freeze frame it, is that something I could potentially share my screen? Because we're not playing video; we're just showing a frame.
We're just showing a frame. You should be able to share it.
Okay, I'll share it. Yeah, I could just plug that. I got OBS running. I can just toggle into
Okay.
that.
As soon as you're ready to share it, go right ahead.
Yeah. I'll wait till the pause happens. Oh wait, did you pause it already? I'm looking at the.
I paused it on my side. You might have to pause it on your side.
Yeah, that's exactly what I got. Okay, let's see. It's also starring. Got it. Okay, associate producer Robert Justman. And then in 5 seconds, there it is. Yeah, so also starring Roger Perry as Major Christopher. So where's the error, or is this a time travel mix up here? Did my audio go out again?
I hear you.
Oh, okay, good. I'm just making sure. But yeah, what do you think? So were you insinuating a time travel mix-up earlier, or just the fact that there's a mistake here?
Just the fact that there's a mistake there.
Okay, because sometimes as a Trekkie, I justify these mistakes and I try to find some in-universe reasoning, and who knows, maybe he is a major now. Maybe they changed something, but probably not. I think it's just a mistake too, and
yeah,
it's like a minor one.
I'm going to show what our good friend Tim posted on the Cosme side.
Cool. Oh, that's beautiful. Is that the model kit? Yeah, I see that. It's nice. Oh, I see that. Oh, yeah. I see the F-10. I see it. Yeah, up. Yep.
And if you look in the background, the Enterprise.
Let's get that one on screen, as they say. F-11, boom, center. There we go. Oh, wow. That is,
the Enterprise is right there.
When you look at the low resolution image, it actually looks like a model kit, not a Lego.
Mm-hmm.
Is this that Lego video game, or did someone just take a picture of a Lego and stylize it a bit? I mean, you got
Tim said someone did it. Someone made it.
Wow, look at that. And we got the Enterprise right there. Yeah, I always wanted to make an Enterprise with Legos. I did a really bad one, and mine was just like, I took the square blocks and kind of did like staircase, zigzags with them, and it was very poor structural integrity. But I was able to take some of the flat Lego pieces and slap them together on the front to kind of get a rough saucer shape going there. But that one,
I'm showing yours because you got it zoomed in, so.
Yeah, and like we got, and this one here, I can see it's got the flat Lego pieces here. So I guess there was a piece that has some kind of angular connection or something, either that or someone just glued it, or it's a digital model anyway. But that's a nice Enterprise there, and this F-104 Starfighter. A beauty there. And this one has missiles on the side, but the one we see in the episode has auxiliary fuel tanks. Sometimes they would have drop tanks. I was learning about the the F-80 or P-80 Sabre, I think I'm remembering, and that was a plane used during the Korean policing action, as they call it. And the tanks on the wing tips were often drop tanks, sometimes made of metal, sometimes made of cardboard. They had their own little fuel nozzle there because back then jet engines were not quite as efficient. And today when they fly an SR-71 Blackbird as an example, upon taking off with that plane, they're almost immediately doing a mid-air refueling, and that's a bit of there's a few other reasons why that is the case. But back in the day, like in Vietnam, when they were using slightly newer jets than what we see here, they would have to refuel more frequently because anytime you were flying low, the answer to not getting hit was fly fast. But unfortunately, jet engines are typically more fuel efficient at higher altitudes, and
Hmm.
so that necessitated more frequent aerial refueling. Running an afterburner, for example, you could be gulping down 20 gallons of fuel per second. So it gets pretty wild there. But yeah, that's a beautiful one. Thanks for posting Dances with Wolves.
Thank you, Tim, for
Tim, I
bringing
mean
my
Tim.
attention
Yeah,
over
that's his
on the
name.
Cosme side.
Yeah, it literally says FKHC, and I'm like saying, "Oh, thanks, Dances with Wolves." But yes, thank you, Tim.
Let's see what everyone's saying. Yep. NCC 1701. She's a beauty.
Hmm.
Although, the refit of the Enterprise, that's not bad looking either.
Oh yeah, that one's like one of the better ones. I mean, like I don't think you can go wrong with the refit version of the Enterprise at all.
But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on Tomorrow's Yesterday and after seeing it again tonight?
Well, for me, I mean, I have nothing. I have nothing to complain about. That's for sure. And it definitely meets the standards. I'm not disappointed by one bit. As for what occurs, so how the heck did they? What was the excuse again for them going back in time? Like, how did they? Was that an accident? They were near a gravitational body or
Yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
they were near a gravitational anomaly that pulled them forward, and they ended up going back in time. And
Okay, so that's why during Gary 7 they were like they used the same technique,
mhm.
and that time they did it on purpose. But in this case here, this is indeed an accident, a happy accident, fortunately. And I think once they realized that Captain Christopher had a son, that kind of like put the rest. Once you saw how he reacted to that information, I think it became clear that okay, this guy could be trusted. We don't have to brain wipe him. We don't have to take him back to the future for us to prevent him from changing the past. And of
Hmm.
course, taking him to the future in the name of preserving the past. So these are details that I sometimes miss during earlier viewings, which is the beauty of rewatching any given episode. And although I don't think we had any, unless I'm overlooking something, any moral quandary in this particular episode, because a lot of times there's a message and not the message, but a message.
Well,
um,
I think the message you can take from this episode is if you go back in time, not that we can, but if you go back in time, make sure you don't tamper with the events that had previously occurred. Otherwise, whatever you do, even the most minuscule of things, might change what you know. You may even cease to exist.
hmm And it's like a lot of unknowns there. And I remember temporal investigations showing up in Captain Cisco's office. I know this is like a whole
Hmm.
other series, but they literally make a reference to Captain Kirk and his, interactions with the timeline. And the guy
Hmm.
literally tells Cisco that man was a menace.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then when Cisco says they saw the Enterprise, they when the guy says, "Which Enterprise? There have been 5," and then the other guy says 6. This was the first. His ship, James T. Kirk, the one and only.
And those guys, I mean, they were surprisingly cool about it. Like
Yeah.
when Cisco told him what he did, that was a little bit, sketchy. Not really sketchy, but just like
Mhm.
kind of like meeting a famous person. They're like, Probably would have done the same thing if I was there too. And I think Cisco played it cool. He's like, "Hey, yeah, I'm on temporary duty. Nice to meet you." Which I
Yeah,
mean, who wouldn't?
exactly. I mean, again, I can't wait till we talk about the trouble of tribbles and trials and tribulations. But the fact that when Dax and Cisco and company go back onto K7, they're sent back to that period of time, and they're donning the uniforms. And Bashir goes up to Cisco and he looks at Cisco and O'Brien and says, "Aren't you two wearing the wrong colors?" and then O'Brien says, "Don't you know anything about this period of time?" And and then Bashir says, "I'm a doctor, not a historian."
He knows something about that period of time, apparently.
Yeah. Well, whatever Dr. McCoy taught, Admiral McCoy, because we know when Encounter at Farpoint premieres, he was Admiral McCoy. So maybe, because I don't know, canonically when Admiral McCoy passed away, but maybe a young Julian Bashir had an interaction with Admiral McCoy.
It's quite possible. I mean, even if he was semi-retired, I mean, at least we know he's an admiral, and he would have been the kind of guy that I would imagine, if he wasn't a professor, would at least maybe visit, maybe get invited to chime in on things, maybe answer questions. I mean, that's a piece of walking history right there. And at the very least, he would have been in historical material. They would have been perhaps collecting information from him, firsthand accounts, any number of things, and I'd imagine that would be important to the curriculum. And this is one of the reasons why, I came to like Star Trek a lot, is that you have that connection, you have that, even a Voyager episode or Next Generation episode, they are referencing original series episodes. There's Voyager episodes where the EMH is referencing something that Dr. McCoy did in the original series, and although I don't think this particular episode factors into any of those flashbacks, there are times with the water carbon, or I can't remember what it was that Dr. McCoy did that Dr. Van Gogh, the EMH referenced. But it's just like, this is what kind of got me uptight about the newer Trek, was just that, like, we had a long-standing chronology. Yeah, there's some adjustments here, but they were typically within reasonable bounds. It wasn't anything, there wasn't a major deviation that required you to question, is this a new timeline? It was like, okay, we understand this is still the same chronology and same timeline, and these events are tied together. And even though the episodes stood alone on their own, you had those episodes that connect to each other, not despite that. I forget what episodic means. If episodic, I always mix up the opposite meaning. That's what I mean. So I believe Babylon 5 and DS9 would be considered episodic, but I'm not sure if I'm mixing up the meaning of that term.
For Deep Space Nine, it started out as episodic, but then it got more serialized as it started going into season 2, and of course you had the Circle, and then of course you start hearing about the Dominion, and then it's in the episode Jem'Hadar, the season finale for season 2, where you actually meet those of the Dominion with the Vorta, and then of course the Jem'Hadar soldier that comes aboard Deep Space Nine. You see the Jem'Hadar fighters for the first time, especially the one that makes a run for the Odyssey.
Yeah, it does one of these.
Yeah,
that it rips a hole in the front of the deflector dish, and you have like just charred up bits, perhaps some plasma conduits that are burnt out, and of course,
and you see a chunk of the hole hit the Bassard collector on the starboard side of the nacelle.
Yeah,
that causes a whole chain reaction.
That's true. So yeah, it would have been ripped a hole here, and then one of the Bassard collectors would have been wrecked, and of course that would
it was a starboard. It was a starboard one, the one on the right side.
Port starboard. Yep. So yeah, it would have been that particular Bussard collector right there. And that captain comes into the Gamma Quadrant pretty arrogant, like thinking, I
Mm-hmm.
got this kick-ass Galaxy class starship, nothing can hurt me. And what he did not anticipate was that the Jem'Hadar don't necessarily need to value the lives of their super soldiers, and
No,
they
not when they're
can.
created in a lab.
Yup, and they can afford to, resort to a tactic. And they both sent the message and demonstrated their standard operating procedure at the same time that this is a tactic that is not off the table. And so, yeah, that captain was pretty justified in his arrogance up to the point of realizing that actually, no, these guys will take it to the next level.
Yeah. Question about that Enterprise that's in your hand. Does the saucer
Oh.
separate from the star drive section?
It does, and I'm thinking about buying another one on eBay because this is the one my brother and I had when we were kids. And if you look here, we can see that one of the clamps are a little dinged up over there. You can see.
Mm-hmm.
Here we can definitely get another camera angle on this one here, I think. So if we go like that, and then we go, so you can see this mechanism here. Here's our star drive, and you can see that's pretty straightforward how that works. You got like the two little openings there. You got probably a battle bridge up here, unless it's buried inside. I think, but we see a little thing up there. And so from the top view, it looks pretty good. And especially in original condition, you wouldn't have this gap here. It'd be pretty well together. So what is missing? And you can see here, there's a trick to this. There we go. So you can see that's the shape of the docking clamp in this context. And I guess it's made of a magnesium alloy or some cheap metal, Chinesium. You can see it's got that like pitted look in there. And you just slide it over. You got to get this plastic notch in position. And yeah, I thought about using a little soldering lead or something. Maybe I'll learn how to make a mold or figure out how to glue something onto that. But like I said, I
Mm-hmm.
figure I'd buy one online and keep that one in good condition and bring this one to work when I want to play with something at work or show it to my coworker who I think might be able to appreciate this. But it's like, yeah, these were cool. I believe they also have a version of this. I don't know if they're readily available on eBay in the same manner, but I believe they have a version of the original Enterprise made of the same material. And I want to say it's Playmates. I believe we have some print. Yep, made in China. So I was right about the Chinesium alloy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and 1987 PPC.
So
Something
that
like
would have
that.
been Galoob.
Galoob.
Because
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Galoob came out with the Type 1 hand phaser. They came out with small 3/4 inch figures of, Data, Riker, Picard, Tasha. And they also came out with the Metal Enterprise that you have in your hand.
So that's the one. And Anonymous says, "Hey, Star Trek nerds."
Good to see you, Anonymous. Speaking of Anonymous, on May 24th, he and I will be talking about the Deep Space Nine episode Paradise. So I'm looking forward to that. Hope you are, Anonymous.
Paradise or Paradise Lost?
No, it's called Paradise.
Okay.
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
you mentioned Deep Space Nine, and Anonymous's ears perk up.
I noticed some issue here. I was just noticing that this Enterprise, the metal one, has copper warp coils, but as you can see, my data list, which granted this is not a OG data list class. This is not necessarily the data list you would have saw in Cisco's office. This is the data list class that was depicted in Enterprise. So it's a little bit nicer. It's got like those modern warp coils, but it kept, even with those, this is what I'm talking about when I say like, yeah, there's going to be minor changes here and there, but this doesn't, okay, Enterprise, okay, I'll admit it does break a bit, but at least this design, basically has the general aesthetic. They're not going too far with the stylization. They did go and give it this forward swept pylon design, but you still have your cylindrical, simple looking, warp nacelles and Bussard collectors. The 3D print did have little pointy things sticking out over here, which, you can imagine some 3D printers are just not going to print that out properly. So
Yeah, but
right off.
even as we saw in Tomorrow's Yesterday, and also watching Where No Man Has Gone Before, the original model of the Enterprise had pointy bits at the end of the Bussard collectors on the
Yep.
nacelles.
Exactly. So that's why that's more accurate to have the pointy bits. But if I really wanted to, I could probably like next time I print something like this, I would probably just take a brass wire or brass rod and just poke it into the end and do a little custom work on it because I find that for thin pieces, you're better off just shoving metal rods into the 3D printing material and not even trying to print an antenna out. If it's a round, thin antenna, do it with a metal wire or a metal, rod. And if you are doing, a blocky antenna, then yeah, you could print those out usually. Like if you look at the Rocinante from the Expanse, you could print out a lot of little bits on the front of that ship. But yeah, anyway, the thing about the Daedalus class was simple design. The secondary hull, you want to keep maybe the hazardous stuff separate from where the rest of the crew are.
Hmm.
But it's also a simple to mass produce ship. This would have been important in the early days of the Federation when they're still, exploring space, but they also have to cover a lot of ground. They have a lot of diplomacy to conduct. They have to show their presence in various places as they're competing with other powers. And, I just thought I'd share this because, if I'm going to be showing something that's from the next generation, totally unrelated to the original series, I'd at least show you guys something that has a little bit more design lineage with the original Enterprise, even if it's, once again, not exactly relevant to
Well,
today's episode.
even with the copper on the warp nacelles of the Enterprise D, that's how the nacelles looked when the ship wasn't powered on.
You're not wrong. Yeah, you're right, actually. This is true because they didn't always glow blue, and you didn't always need to energize those warp coils. That's a fair point. Nor would you want to energize them if you're performing maintenance, unless you want
Hmm.
to cook something or somebody, as has been depicted on the Next Generation when someone was thrown into there as part of a murder mystery, and
Hmm.
when
Season 7 of episode.
yup, exactly. And then there was the what you call it, the Enterprise episode where they had to hunker down and they said, okay, we're going to be going through an ion storm. The ship's shields can't handle it, so everyone has to hunker down into the warp nacelle. And because apparently that was the only part of the ship that had appropriate shielding for people to kind of hang out there. And it was all fine and dandy until someone hijacks your ship and starts turning things on.
Well,
um,
even that Next Generation episode where Picard is the only one left on the
oh,
Enterprise, and they're going through that baryon sweep. Everyone else is down on the planet, and you have those people who are trying to hijack the Enterprise and take it and use it. And Picard gives himself a different name, and the only reason Picard's on the Enterprise is because he forgot his saddle.
hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even Tuvok threatened him with a plasma torch in that one.
True, he threatened him with a plasma torch, and then later on we see him on the Enterprise B.
Oh yeah, yeah, man, that guy, he gets it. Now that's
Yeah,
someone.
and in flashback on Voyager, he's on the Excelsior.
He is it all, and actually, I think didn't they literally acknowledge that that was not like a acting thing. He was literally a crew member on Excelsior, according to the lore that they established in that episode.
Mm-hmm.
hmm So that was pretty cool because I mean he's a Vulcan. Vulcans are long lived, and while Dr. McCoy has that benefit of life extension via modern technology, the Vulcans, you know, looking young in senior years is sort of a gift they have, a biological gift of sorts. Just that's their species. They age more slowly, or at least they can handle senior age for a
Mm-hmm.
longer period of time than us humans.
Yeah, they can because Sarek's alive during the time of the Next Generation, unfortunately. And spoiler alert for anyone who's never seen it, he dies in Unification Part 2.
Yep.
And Pat, I want to be good to see you here, brother. Hope you're doing
hmm
well this Saturday night. Says, I meant to send it as just a photo, Pacific. I sent a Discord of a Lego ship. I'm curious of yours and DJ's opinion on the build. Okay,
Yeah.
let's pull up that communication. Excuse me. I
Doo,
don't
doo,
know
doo.
why I'm coughing tonight. Hmm.
Oh,
Well, you
actually,
can definitely see it. The Klingons, the Romulans would definitely see it coming from light years away. I'll bring it up. I'll bring it up. I'll bring it up so
I
you
just
all know
realized
what I.
something. The guy, Roger Perry, the actor, one of he's related to another famous Perry out there. Well, I'll show you later. Oh, wow, wow. Yeah, yeah. I remember seeing this one a while ago. And is that Legos?
That's made out of Legos.
Yellow Legos. And some of those pieces.
And the tires, the deflector dish.
That's pretty clever. And because it's got a rusty like middle to it. It's got that copperish color to it. So that's pretty good. And heck, I would feel like this would be a very, you could imagine this to be a Starfleet ship in the yards, perhaps, doing something. I don't know what, carrying
A
supplies.
Starfleet
around.
Academy ship.
Oh, and a cat. There you go.
A training
you gotta
ship.
have, you gotta have it in that yellow. You don't want those. You don't want to lose those cadets. Navigation error. Got to track them down. But no, it makes sense in general. But yeah, this is interesting because I'm noticing some of these pieces don't look entirely familiar to me, like the type of Lego pieces. I see. That's how you get the rounded edges. It's like a hinged. If I'm understanding correctly, it almost looks like those are hinged pieces along the perimeter.
And they call it the USS Construction.
Ha! Of course they do. That makes sense.
Well,
That does have.
you know what? You have the dry docks building other ships. This could be a construction ship carrying the
Yeah.
materials.
Exactly. Can't beam everything.
No.
Apparently. No, some things you really can't beam. I firmly, I think I get that impression. Like I know sometimes it's a plot device, but it seems that you can't beam everything. It's like there's just certain things that don't go into the transporter. They're
No.
dangerous to beam. They
Not
maybe
the
can't be
antimatter.
trusted. Yup. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Especially large quantities of antimatter. You might be able to do small quantities because I think they've done it, but it's not something that anybody goes out of their way to, move large amounts of through a transporter beam. Nor should they.
And Padawannabe says, "Caution, student drivers. Yeah, we have cadets at the helm." Captain, the inertial dampeners are offline. That ship must have students on board.
Yup. And one
And
thing
that- Go ahead.
no, it's random. I was just like skimming through the episode, and I don't know. Sometimes I like admiring old computers, computers from the '60s and stuff like that. And what I see here is, let's see if we can shuffle to the left here. You can see like these tape drives. These would have been contemporary to the era, and I'm not sure if
Let
these
me just remove this.
I think it's the telemetry. I think these are the computers you would have used for flight telemetry, And this would have been another valuable piece of information they would have had to collect. So I believe Sulu returned with this because it looked like a film reel that Sulu was returning with. So when he beams aboard and, what's his name is like, well, let's see. And then that's, okay, that looks like a computer reel right there. Then this is the film room. So they're analyzing the film. Kirk gets into a karate chop fight with somebody.
The Kirk shop.
And then, is that a film reel? Maybe that is a film reel because you can't look at computer tape like that.
That's
Well,
film
either-
roll.
Okay, that is a film reel. And, of course, you would have these, cameras in the fighter planes, sometimes 16 millimeter film. Typically, you use it like, in battle. It's like they call it the gun cam. And even in World War II, when you press that button, when you pull that trigger, that triggers the camera. And so generally there would be enough film to get like a few seconds of footage at a time, enough to see your rounds hit the enemy so that you can get a confirmed kill and I guess, work your way up towards being an ace. But in UFO observation, we see even in the modern era, they have those FLIR cameras, like during the popular aircraft carrier footage where they spot the tic-tac or the other thing. And don't even get me started on that because I'm sorry, like there's just not enough information to make any determination about that footage. And I think sometimes that information is misinterpreted. I think some people are disingenuous. I think some people favor the esoteric explanation. But, it's the same concept today. It's digitally recorded. And one thing about those cameras were if they were recording that footage in '09, those cameras are from 1999. So it's like another thing is like, infrared image sensor does not know what it's looking at. Just like when I'm doing astrophotography and I'm putting together these simple, like raw images here. So like I got the star cluster here and the colors, the crap. I'm manually integrating the colors together, but a camera that does that for you automatically, sometimes it gets the colors wrong. And I'm mixing. I have to mix this with the red, blue, and green channel and suppress the red background and
Hmm.
get like basically a mix of red, blue, and green from the cigar over here on the right, and that's gonna be how I get the true colors out of it. And when everything's said and done, this part here outburst in red. You'll notice there's like this side pattern coming out, and in the blue and green channels, we don't see that outbursting coming in the middle. It's only the red because that's the light that comes from hydrogen. But anyway, film. You can, if you get a good film capture of a unidentified flying object, that might have more veracity than what you would get out of a digital recording or a analog video recording from a modern fighter jet. Because one of the things I was noticing was the issue was that type of camera had a like a gimbal. It was like a swivelly piece.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You see it on modern aircraft. So I mean, have you seen Top Gun Maverick?
Oh, not yet. I seen parts of it, but I didn't see the whole
Okay.
movie yet.
Well, you'll notice in Top Gun Maverick when you watch it that there's the cameras on board and how they're on a swivel, so they can track the target and record the action that's happening up in the air.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about those is that as that camera is panning from left to right, there are times where if the object that it's tracking and it has an auto tracking feature, where once you draw a box around the object, it can detect the difference in contrast of the object versus the background. So that's how it can essentially automatically follow the object. Now, what happens if that object is moving fairly fast, gets to the edge of the frame, like it goes from here, in fact, oh, good, the Enterprise, we can use the Enterprise right here. Yeah, so you're tracking. Okay, I can't do that. I'm sorry, my coordination's backwards. Because it's like, but
Yeah, because it's behind you. It's moving.
so like any object will do, but like the idea is that as it's getting to the edge of the frame, the camera has to pan like this. So it's got to go, "Whoop," and when it does that, when it's panning suddenly, it looks like the object is doing this. And so in some of that footage, people say that thing is going really fast, and there's no craft on the Earth that can go that fast. Therefore, it must be ETs. And of course, anyone who says it must be, it's a red flag right there. But the thing is that that's the thing. It's an illusion. When that thing gets to the edge of the frame and the tracking is trying to follow, it'll suddenly turn. Or even a weirder phenomenon is the way those gimbals work. You got an X and Y axis. You got rotate and you got up and down pivot. And sometimes as it's doing a diagonal, it has to suddenly like re-straighten the gimbal out basically.
Mhm.
And doing that will create some weird effects where the object looks like it's darting across the frame. So, it's almost harder to trust that. At least you could trust a fighter pilot pointing the nose of his plane at the mysterious plane. Mysterious flying object. That you can trust. So, I think like if this was done in the 90s or the 2000s, when they went back, if they went back in time to the, early 21st century, assuming,
Mhm.
Khan notwithstanding, they might not have to go out of their way to go and retrieve that footage. They might be able to say, it's going to be crap footage anyway.
Yeah.
Like maybe some people will know what it is, but, you can't change the timeline if you don't have anything to
But,
reverse engineer.
but Spock's probably still would have brought up the fact that the footage is still there, and with modern advancements, they may be able to clear it up to where they can recognize the Enterprise. So it is still critical for them to recover that
Ah,
information
good
and
point.
destroy it.
Now, the good news is that if they have a data center to destroy, or maybe like Enterprise, if they know where the data is being stored, and this is a big if, pre-cloud, or with government information systems or military, they're not necessarily putting stuff on the cloud. It's like the things with classification statuses aren't appropriate for certain information systems, but perhaps the Enterprise could just zap it from orbit if they know physically where it is, or even just sending your landing party down. You can easily just zap a hard drive, so to speak. I mean, yeah, we use
I
the
was going to say,
bouncers. Hmm.
with the technology on the Enterprise, they could probably corrupt the data from orbit.
Yep, exactly. So, either from orbit or even in person, like something, a phaser, something. I'm sure there's something like on the tricorder that will do a proper DOD wipe in like 5 seconds as opposed
Hmm.
to like 12 hours. Because essentially, the way you erase hard disk drives, and hard disk drives were used on fighter jets. I don't know if they were used for the archival footage, but I do recall a pilot showing that he had like this is like a episode of something on the Discovery Wing channel. He had
Hmm.
a regular 3.5 inch hard drive in a caddy, which I have a 3.5 inch hard drive on my desk over here. Let's see, I got an Xbox game. I got an N64 remote. Where's my hard drive? Ah, here it is. You know, standard 3.5 inch hard drive, and granted, in late '90s it would have been a different connection on the end, but yeah, this is
Hmm.
a standardized form factor that they've been using for like over 25 years and even longer, like 30 years. And um, this is what the fighter pilot had in some kind of special enclosure. Perhaps it had some like shock mounting on there, but this was like a flight recorder, something like in the Gundam series 0083 when Ko Yuraki goes out into combat. He has a little mini disc that contains his Gundam flight data. And granted, that was more vital to making the Gundam operate correctly. In the case of the fighter jet, it's more like logging the data, analyzing it, seeing if anything went wrong, like, well, what went wrong on the fly-by-wire system? What control surface decided to do something other than what it was supposed to do?
Hmm.
Um, but my point is, yeah, the way you would erase a conventional hard drive is either by writing recording zeros to it, and the caveat is that even if you write zeros to every sector on the disk and you overwrite every sector, and even if a data recovery tool couldn't read the data, someone can basically essentially remove this controller board. I noticed it's transparent, but it's normally a green printed circuit board.
Hmm.
And on this board, this is what sends commands. It detects when the motor is spinning. It commands the read write heads, which are like the little needles that go magnetically
Yep.
reading it. And if you hook those read write heads up to something like an oscilloscope, you do get waves. And typically, a 1 or 0 will be represented as a peak or a pit. Now, the thing is that if just because you overwrote some old data, if you tune that thing just right, you still see the peaks and pits for the data that was previously stored there. That's why people
Hmm.
make a big deal about, if you really want to protect your privacy, or if you have something truly sensitive and someone who can obtain that drive knows that you have something sensitive, because obviously no one's going to pick my hard drive out of the garbage and invest 10 grand in, a data recovery on that drive. But
No.
if it's a government drive from a government information system and some bad actor obtains it, they may very well be able to bring it somewhere that is able to facilitate. So that's why some people will drill a hole in a hard drive, because once you drill a hole in a hard drive, it becomes impractical to recover the data from the drive or drill holes in it. At my job, I was degassing hundreds of hard drives a month ago, where we put it in this big metal box. We press a button, and then after 30 seconds, you hear a popping sound. I don't know what the popping sound is, but I'm guessing it's charging a capacitor and then discharging it with a intensely strong magnetic field. Maybe it's pulling on. My guess is it's pulling on the drive. So maybe any parts that are metallic that do have ferrous metals that are magnetic, they're inside the compartment. They're in a drawer, and when that magnetic field goes on, I'm guessing it's pulling the drive up and then it's dropping it or some weird stuff like that. But you could do these things. I'm sure you could do this on a tricorder or with a
Hmm.
phaser. Um, you
Well,
know,
we know even by the time of the next generation that they're able to, take a tricorder and download data. Heck, the
yeah.
episode where Janeway and crew go back to 1996, and Janeway just puts her tricorder next to the laptop, and she's able to recover the data that was stolen from Voyager.
This is true, and so they have a range of capabilities. Whereas with film, you're limited. You have to physically get that film into your hands and make sure, or have someone who you can trust, such as Captain Christopher, to confirm that that film has not been duplicated, or that he saw to it that there will be or was an accident, as he honorably did to help our protagonist in this episode.
Hmm.
I believe he saw to it that there's an accident. May have got a little trouble for it, but he understood the stakes.
Well, I mean, he wouldn't have gotten in trouble since they went back in time and beamed Captain Christopher basically onto himself.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, right before they tractor beamed him. Yep,
Hmm.
that was
And
good timing.
by the time the Captain Christopher of that new time. Because let's face it, the timeline was changed as far as the 20th century was concerned, as far as that incident was concerned, because Christopher saw the Enterprise at one point and then didn't see the Enterprise.
Yep, that is true too. It just disappeared from his scope, from his, his canopy view.
Mm-hmm.
Dances with Owls says, I burn all of my hard drives. There we go. I just posted a fire emoji next to a CD because I don't have any hard drive emojis. But that's a good way too. That's what I'm saying. That's why I mentioned the phaser, because heat can ruin magnets.
Mm-hmm.
Intense heat. You put a magnet in a fire or something, it loses its magnetic properties, so to speak. And you do this to hard disk platters. You're doing the right thing. You heat up the hard drive. You're burning it. You're warping the hard disk. So depending on if they want to leave evidence of them shooting the hard drive. I mean, they can incinerate the hard drive. We know that.
Yes.
They can, vaporize it. If they don't even want to leave that evidence, they could probably still use a different setting to scramble the data, whether with a tricorder. Because I believe tricorders, can do that. They definitely could read data off hard drives. And certainly by that level of technology, it makes sense. It's like, okay, who needs read-write heads? But detecting the same thing the read-write heads detect, perhaps through some quantum effect, you could do it at a distance. That's sort of the whole point of science fiction technology. But anything that, just like hitting it, ionizing it, a lot of those things would, I think, do a good job of flipping those magnetic peaks in such a way that, they're completely illegible. And so if you wanted to leave the drive behind, so that somebody can say, oh, let's try to get the data, and they realize, it's corrupted, but we don't know how. At least there's no evidence of foul play. They can just say in the report, electrostatic discharge, who knows?
We don't know how this data was corrupted, but somehow it was corrupted, and there's no evidence of there ever being someone here using a device to corrupt it.
Yep. Now, of course, if the company, let's say the government at that point in time is doing business with a particular vendor, and they decide these drives are unreliable, we're not doing business with the vendor, that could be an issue there with implications for the future. Like suddenly the wrong hard drive company becomes the top dog in the industry, and who knows how that can change the future. But one thing I'm noticing, and granted, we've never tested time travel, but sometimes it seems like in some plots at least, the things are interchangeable. It's like whether it's true or not that you can or cannot change destiny. Some, who do ascribe to that, some writers who go along with that, you'll see that, you could change certain things and yet the future will still march towards the direction it's going. You might
because the timeline, supposedly from this report I read a few weeks ago, the timeline will self-correct.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So I was like,
it's what this one report was saying. Even if you go back in time, they were even speculating that you may be able to see all the events, but you cannot interfere with the events.
That's the thing. So I got two theories on that, and this is a little bit out of the realm of Star Trek, but one theory is that, well, when you go back in time, you may make it so that you are not born, but I don't think the paradox applies. I think that you're in the past, you are now part of the timeline at that point in the past, and so just because you couldn't go back in time, you're already there. So there's just certain things that can't be reconciled. That's just like a theory based on nothing. But I also thought about this. What would a time machine, a real time machine, look like? And the thing is,
well, if it's not a DeLorean with a stainless steel construction and a flux capacitor, it's not a time machine. Or a phone booth. Don't forget the phone booth.
Oh yeah. There you go. Yeah, so it would have to be a phone booth. Perhaps today it would be a cell phone. Did they do that in the Bill and Ted movie? Did they use cell phones in the Bill and Ted movie?
No. In Bill and Ted Face the Music, they still use the old phone booth.
I mean, I think it's beautiful. I think it's cool. But I'm thinking like Quinn Mallory on Sliders. Jerry O'Connell.
Where he used that TV remote to open the portal.
Yeah,
that was such a great show.
Yeah, it was a good show. But way I see time travel, a real time machine, like what we can conceive, whether we have the energy or the fuel or the propulsion capabilities. What we do know is that time moves. I'm not necessarily going to say this exactly correctly, but time dilation, for all intents and purposes, when you move at a higher speed, let's say you're on Earth and I go on a spaceship. I fly towards Alpha Centauri at say 90% the speed of light. There's a calculator online that will tell you. There are many calculators online that will tell you the time differential, and essentially assuming that you could, spend the 5 years going in both directions or 10 years going back and forth. Maybe you don't stop at Alpha Centauri. Maybe you just turn around and you come back. I will come back aging less than you, and so let's just say, pretend for example, I'm gone for 20 years. I come back, I'm only 15 years older. You're 20 years older, I'm 15 years older. Now of course, yes, I try to explain this to my dad, and he's like, but if the two clocks are ticking like this, I'm like, dude, just imagine that there's an imaginary bubble. I don't know what to tell. It's relativity. But what I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
say is that I
Well,
don't
I
need to
mean,
prove it.
they even touched on it in Back to the Future when Doug first was showing Marty the DeLorean, and
Mm-hmm.
Einstein's in the DeLorean and becomes the world's first time traveler. But when they show the two clocks, Doc's clock is ahead by 1 minute. Einstein's clock is behind by 1 minute.
Hmm. And of course, he was in a DeLorean alone at that point, or did
Yeah,
he?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Einstein was in the DeLorean alone. Doc had the remote, and he sped the DeLorean up to 88 miles per hour. And Marty's recording, and Marty's thinking he's going to get hit by the DeLorean as it's racing at them, going 88 miles per hour before the temporal displacement happens.
Yep.
And Doc even says when Einstein shows up, because you know, Doc is wearing one of his many watches, and it beeps, and he pushes Marty out of the way and says, "Look out!" That's when Einstein catches up with him in their present time. He says, "Look, Einstein's clock is 1 minute behind mine and still clicking." I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I should have done that right. Einstein's clock is precisely 1 minute behind mine and still clicking.
And at that point, it sounds to me that he traveled through time separately, so it doesn't exactly tie into dilation, but they are still in different frames of reference, so
Mm-hmm.
that is relevant. And so what I'm getting at in short is, like, we know this is reason that I'm confident. Like, I'm not, look, I didn't run the numbers myself, but it seems that enough people checked it that this appears to be a real phenomenon. But the main crux of relativity, I can understand people saying, how do you confirm something so nebulous as, time dilation? The idea that whether you go, so it's not so much about the speed you go, it's the amount of acceleration you're under or the amount of gravity you're under. So that's why, when you read about, if you read, UC Berkeley has a FAQ on black holes, and it sets out to address a lot of these relevant questions, and talks about, like, real, like, at least the relativity at the time in the late 90s. What are the consequences of doing this? What would you see if you watched Jimmy going into a black hole event horizon and you're looking at Jimmy from afar? Well, essentially, if Jimmy is doing this with his hands, from where you're looking, Jimmy's hands would move more and more slowly as they got deeper into that gravitational field. And
Mm-hmm.
his clock would appear to tick slower if you could zoom in on the seconds hand from that far away using an optical lens. Now, for Jimmy, time is moving just the same as it does. It's not like the Stargate SG-1 episode when the SG team is on a planet with a black hole and they're running to the gate and they're like, oh, no, which is cool and fun but not realistic. But really, what supports relativity? Because I don't want to say proves it, but what's the strongest evidence we have for relativity right now, and arguably proof? That's GPS. Because the thing is that GPS satellites, for your device to, triangulate your location purely with GPS, it has to receive signals from, a handful of satellites, anywhere from 3 to 10 of them, let's just say. And what you're receiving is a signal from the satellite. It says which satellite it is, which orbit it is on, so that gives you an idea of where it is, and what time it was according to that satellite when it transmitted that signal. And so each satellite is transmitting this microwave beam containing these 3 pieces of information. And it should be noted that at the time that these satellites are launched, they all have atomic clocks that are synchronized with the United States Naval Observatory atomic clock. So these things are accurate within a, fraction of a second over the course of thousands of years, or some pretty significant time span like that. So these are pretty darn accurate clocks. And yet they do have discrepancies, and it's not just a time delay, because that's part of the formula. When your device receives a signal from a number of GPS satellites, the reason that older GPSs feel like they get hot is because they're not sending any signals. They're receiving signals and they're doing number crunching right there. And so the difference in time, part of that is a function of how far away that satellite is. But another part of that difference in time is literally because when that satellite's in orbit, it's moving at some ridiculous speed, let's say 30 times the speed of sound. I'm making up numbers here, but you know what I mean. And the thing is that if you did not take relativity into account in the mathematics in the GPS receiver, if your GPS receiver did not take relativity into account, it would not get an accurate location fix. So, granted, yeah, you have to audit the code or learn to read the code, but if you do, the answer is in there, the evidence that it works. So that's why I say that a real-time machine would be something that exploits time dilation, that either brings you at a high speed to a strong gravitational field. If we spot a black hole of appropriate mass nearby, we can use that. But what that means is that we can travel to the future potentially, given that we iron out how you propel yourself or accelerate yourself to a high speed and bring yourself back to where you physically were in space, not just time, but like physically. You can use, that law of relativity and high rates of acceleration to bring yourself to the future in a time span that is shorter than the time in which you age. So I might age 1 year, I could potentially go 18 months into the future, or more dramatic, like 15 years in the future in exchange for 9 years of my life. And I don't know what practical benefit there would be for that. The problem now is that the implication with relativity also is that we have a cosmic speed limit. You cannot go faster than light. And the main reason is that the amount of energy required. And what I find interesting is that as you get to that 99.999, the speed of light number, the graph goes logarithmically up. Like it goes like a smooth curve, then towards like that 99.8, 99.9, 99.999, like it gets really steep. And it comes down to a point that to go 1 decimal point of a percentage faster than 99.9, you need like 10 times more fuel. And then, of course, rocket equation. You need more fuel to carry the fuel. That's part of the math of launching a rocket is, not just the payload, but when you add the fuel to carry that payload, do you have enough fuel to carry that payload plus fuel? This is part of why we stage rockets in separate pieces. So bottom line is that that's what a real-time machine looks like. Something that can exploit relativity in that form. And I can't think of anything exciting that we could do with it. But the last thing I would say about it is that if you play the rules really loose, suppose you do manage to have enough energy to go faster than light, then what happens? Does time go to a stop? Do you go backwards in time? And in a way, if going backwards in time in general is impossible, it sort of like shows like the laws of that relativity, the energy requirement that is just insurmountable is like that brick wall that guarantees that nobody's going back in time. So it's like we almost have like we have a conceptualization in our grasp of how going back in time would work. Now, the breakaway maneuver is brilliant because whether I don't know if it checks out, but with warp drive, we are bending space. And there's mathematics now from the Alcubierre warp drive, and every time someone tries to do the math to disprove it, they end up getting the math to be more favorable. So I think when Alcubierre came out with his equation, it was like you need all of the energy in the known universe, or you need all of the energy in the galaxy to power this type of engine, and then or technology. And then when they recalculate it again, or some other doctor did it, he comes up with a figure of you need all the cumulative energy in Jupiter to do this. And it's like warp drive, and it's like, well, okay, that's still insurmountable, but that's orders of magnitude less energy than the collective energy of the entire galaxy. So if we keep doing the math on this and people keep coming up with better numbers as we get better understandings of physics, we might get to a point where we can take advantage of that. And of course, that gets around the the whole time thing, because you're essentially in your own frame of reference. You're not really going faster than light. But now, what happens when you interact with a gravitational field like the sun or some other strong gravitational field? And that's where like
you have to factor those gravitational fields in.
Yeah, and like, can you have a happy accident? Can you do something where you can indeed use something like the slingshot maneuver, because essentially they're warping space in the presence of a gravitational field. They're potentially somehow going faster than light in such a way that doesn't actually break the laws of physics, but apparently, like I could actually, the more I understand about the real world physics and what little I understand about it. Okay, let's be clear here. I don't know jack about it. I'm just giving you guys a very surface level overview, but I can kind of see it. Is my point.
I mean, there are many theories on time travel. Some have speculated that we can only go forward in time; we cannot go back in time.
That's kind of where I'm at right now. Even with like time dilation, like you can control how far forward in time you go. So although there's no clear advantage to that right now, the only cool advantage would be a friend came up with a brilliant idea, and it is you have a ship park outside the solar system with a bunch of scientists on it. Maybe you have them go park outside the galaxy, and you have it somehow maintain or decelerate so that it's technically moving at a slower rate of speed than us and parts of our galaxy or whatever. And so now, when that group of scientists rejoins our civilization, say 10 years from now, perhaps they spent 100 years on that ship conducting research on various things. And of course, assuming they don't take over the world, that might be an interesting way to fast track innovation. But once again, this is a very rough idea. Even if it physically worked, there's a lot of weird implications as to like
Hmm.
how it could be, just like Dances with Hours is saying. Very good quote there. I know it's not a quote. I'm quoting Dances with Hours. Time travel is nuts and can be dangerous. And in that
Hmm.
scenario, like, you might say, let's fund these scientists, put them on a ship, have them come back with these great technologies that will allow us to rule the world. And then instead they come back and they go, bitch, please.
Yeah,
Get.
I mean, Star Trek has touched on time travel so many times. You have Captain Janeway saying, "Even don't even get me started on temporal mechanics."
Temporal mechanics. I remember the way she said it too.
Yeah, yeah, and the way Kate Mulgrew kind of rolls her eyes and puts her hand toward her head. Yeah, that would be a headache for someone like Jamie, who was a science officer before she was a captain, to calculate. You got to make sure your calculations are correct because you could end up in a star.
That's yeah. It's like in Star Wars when they said you can like end up coming out of hyperspace inside of a supernova. Now I don't know if Han Solo meant you can cause a supernova or you would end up appearing in the supernova. But either way, none of these things are good. And in Star Wars, they have a pretty well hashed out concept of hyperspace insofar as space is not a consistent medium. It is a naughty medium. You got areas where you cannot go into hyperspace or that are not mapped out. You have lanes, and even on Star Trek, we talk about the lanes like in
Yeah,
Next Generation.
subspace.
Yep,
When they're plotting their course, they have to plot it around different systems, different stars. You know, if you can't get into subspace here, then you pretty much can't plot your course in that particular sector. Maybe there's a lot of radiation preventing any sort of subspace field.
that's true too. Yeah, and even like the time they had the interstellar lanes where it was a real issue. They were doing almost the equivalent of rug burn, or what is it called when you mess up a carpet from running around on the same part of the carpet. They had that going on, and it was causing rifts in subspace in the fabric of space time, and
Hmm.
they had to impose a warp 5 speed limit. And of course, later on, they get around that speed limit. Thank God, because I think Star Trek would be a
Yeah,
little boring if you had a warp 5 speed limit. I mean, you need the
yeah.
droids, you need.
When that episode of Next Generation aired and they implemented the Warp 5 speed limit, I was thinking, I was a teenager at the time. That is a dumb idea. And then, of course, we get Voyager, the Intrepid class, and what does it nacelle pylons do? They're flat when they're at impulse engines, but they go up
Yep.
at an angle when they're going to warp. That was their quote unquote way around it.
Exactly, and that works. I mean, that's a brilliant answer. It's like it's like the geometry. So newer warp engines are innovative in dealing with that type of issue, and so they're on the right track there. Because I mean, I think like I can understand pre-existing ships that don't take that into account. They have to like maybe observe that speed limit in heavily trafficked lanes, but in the event of like a new Starfleet ship or going through ground that is not heavily trafficked. Either which way, if you can improve your geometry to allow ships to go through the popular traffic lanes without ruining space, great. And certainly like you want your Starfleet ships to have that strategic advantage. It's sort of like one of those limitations that your enemies are not necessarily going to comply with. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you got to be there for a fleet engagement with all of your ships. They got to be there with with all of their ships at a fleet engagement, and the way you're going to do it, you're both going to be breaking that speed limit. So it's like you're
Yeah,
not going to.
you are, and that's why we
Mm-hmm.
saw the implementation of the Kira class starships, the Steamrunner class starships. The Sovereign. You can't
Oh
forget the Sovereign.
yeah, those are cool. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what planet the women were for that computer facility that Captain Kirk went to? Let me see. Tomorrow is yes. I'll do a quick. I know you. I know you want to wrap up soon. I'm sure. I know we've been running at this long, and it's been a good discussion. Any
But
there's
it's been fun, and it happens with Baron and I recently on Pop Talk, as many can attest to, who've watched this recently. We get on the subject of Star Trek, and we won't shut up about it.
mm-hmm.
And the whole reason why I'm even doing this is because I still love Star Trek, but I love a specific area of Star Trek. It's the Gene Roddenberry, Rick Berman era of Star Trek,
Yep.
and with this particular live stream series, I didn't want to be like everybody else going through each series and episodes in chronological order. I wanted to talk about specific orders with people like you, people like Baron, people like Anonymous. Hopefully, at some point, Nerporeal Lifeform can come on. Stone Loki. I know I've sent a message to Smoking Patriot, who's interested. He's just on a cruise right now, so he'll let me know what episode he wants to discuss. And
Mm-hmm.
I've even talked to Lord Crit of Everest Productions about coming on, and it it gives us a chance to highlight episodes that are worth highlighting, and it also gives us a chance to highlight the episodes where we think, if they could only go back to the drawing board on this episode and change, even a minor thing about the episode to improve
Mm-hmm.
it,
Oh yeah.
we can talk about that.
Well, that's a good point. Because that's definitely like because one thing was like the episode speaks for itself. The story is told. I can't really complain about it. It's like we could poke fun at the visual effects, but when you think about the times, and also I can relate to it. There's one scene where I see the warp nacelles on the Enterprise doing that thing that my microphone is doing right now. You see that little noise
Mm-hmm.
pattern? It's very
Yeah,
subtle, but
yeah. When you see the exterior shot in Tomorrow's Yesterday, and the Enterprise is coming toward the camera, you see
mm-hmm.
everything's pixelated.
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing is like it wasn't just pixelated. It was like it was that analog pixelation, almost like you had trouble with a rotoscoping mask or whatever they were using in conjunction with film. I know. I learned recently. Well, I forgot who mentioned it. It might have been on Pops's show. They mentioned the concept of sodium. Ooh, it's like a method using sodium lighting or something like that. But they use sodium lighting and they use film, and essentially they're using an orange screen in this context, and this is what they used for Alice in Wonderland. So
Mm-hmm.
this is like an earlier technique that predates modern chroma keying, but from what I can figure, it works on the same principle, just a little bit more intricate how you execute it.
Yeah.
But the first step is filming, or part of it is filming with the sodium light. Now, um, I'm gonna do a test here. We're gonna ask ChatGPT, um, in which on what planet did the Enterprise get its computer serviced by females during prior to Tomorrow is Yesterday, right? Is that the name of the episode?
Yeah,
Or
Tomorrow's Yesterday, and I'm gonna address
yes,
this
go for it.
comment by Dances with Valves. You know what it is, Dances with Owls? We're fans, and it's because of Star Trek that we became more curious about not just the world around us, but what's out there. So anything that dealt with space exploration, what scientists were theorizing, coming up with, analyzing even episodes of Star Trek, and thinking, could a transporter happen? Could warp drive, some form of it, happen? Could we go out there and seek out new life and new civilizations, boldly going where no one has gone before, or in Kirk's time, no man has gone before?
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming, just at awe with all this. Especially like I said earlier, with Tomorrow's Yesterday being the episode for me at 7 years old back in 1985, going, I'm a Star Trek fan.
Yep.
I'm a Star Trek fan who wants to think. Think about all the possibilities. In a way, I am quoting Kirk from The Wrath of Khan. Think about all the possibilities, Spock said. And you do. You think, well, what about this? And again, you find material on it, whether it now be online, watching videos, finding magazines back in the day, books back in the day, and reading up on it.
Mm-hmm.
What were the scientists of the time thinking about back then? What are they thinking about presently? And what are scientists going to theorize and experiment with in the future?
Yep. And I mean, like, in a way, it inspired innovation, not just for people to become engineers. Although, like, I watched like a lady, I think she's Dutch, named Sabine Hassenfelder, and she mentions, like, she became a theoretical physicist because of Star Trek. As a youth, she loved Star Trek. It
Mm-hmm.
evidently inspired her. She wanted to see this future, but she also, saw that we can unlock a lot of potential. And as we learn about the laws of nature around us, we, sometimes we correlate things like, even the quantum world is becoming a thing that, like, might enable us to do more as we, better understand what atoms are doing, how to interact with atoms, how to leverage them in whether it be quantum computers, which of course I think gets hyped up quite a bit. Like, I don't think a lot of people understand what a quantum computer is or isn't, and it's really not a lot of things, but it does have a lot of potential in terms of, like, cryptography and stuff like that. It's something that it is worth experimenting on to figure out, like, how do we leverage this technology, how do we use it for math. I heard Microsoft came out with a chip that may effectively make it more practical to use quantum computing in a PCI card, basically, without a bunch of liquid nitrogen. But the time travel, yeah, a danger. The other things, even warp drives, there are concerns. Like, you build an interstellar drive, you build something like an impulse drive, or even a precursor to that would be like a nuclear fission drive. This is not something that you necessarily want to be pointing the exhaust nozzle of at a planet when you begin to
No,
accelerate. Is one of the things that you need to get out of a star system. And one thing that I love is
and
that,
that's something Star Trek has even talked about.
yeah, oh, dude,
Going
yeah.
to warp outside of a system. You don't go
Mm-hmm.
to warp when you're in a planet. Although we've seen episodes and movies where they actually have gone to warp in a system, or they've gone to warp within the atmosphere. I mean, look at the voyage home. The Klingon bird of prey goes to warp while it's still inside Earth's atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. And, like, I imagine part of it is a safety thing. Part of it is because you need more precision to plot a course. Although I would say Spock would be the man to do it, to do the mathematics for that.
Mm-hmm.
But you like, there are many sci-fi's. Even the Lost in Space movie that came out in 1999 or 2000, like, they had a jump gate, but they had to use the hyperdrive without the jump gate. The jump gate is
Mm-hmm.
linked to another jump gate, but without the jump gates, you don't know where the heck you are. And these are things that come up in other instances where it's like, shoot, what sci-fi did I watch recently, or was it a book I read? But this is a recurring theme sometimes, and it's a smart thing to throw in, like, oh, because we had to use our warp drive without using the navigational computer, because we had to use our jump drive without running the numbers, or while we were too close to a star, we know it's going to be inaccurate. And one thing I have no idea what direction that type of technology would take, but we don't have jump drives exactly. That's a good question, Dances with Hours. We have the mathematics for warp drive right now, or something like warp drive. Certainly, the people of Trek did not necessarily envision that this would be a real thing. But like, also, I just want to touch on, I remember there was an Enterprise episode where they have a shuttle pod in a planetary atmosphere, and something happens. A plasma manifold gets stuck in the open position or some insane crap like that, and this thing is just spewing fire out of the back exhaust of this little shit shuttle. And these are Enterprise shuttle pods. This is the NX class Enterprise. This is pre Captain Kirk, 800 and something years in our future. And it's like, these are not complicated things, but they do have a little impulse drive, and it is an ejectable unit, that has, a pretty powerful, reactor using deuterium, which is sort of like a type of hydrogen, basically. So, it is a nuclear fusion reactor. And yeah, like, it kills people. Like, they're literally leaving the orbit of the planet, leaving the surface of the planet, beginning to enter orbit, and this fireball comes out, and it wrecks an urban population center. And there's like a whole case, and they're trying to frame, Lieutenant Reed for the transgression, when apparently there's a bit more intrigue going on. There's a bit of a, remember, you have that temporal Cold War, unfortunately, for better or for worse.
Yeah, that went nowhere. But we'll definitely watch some Enterprise episodes and.
And okay, here's a curveball, Bob Lazar. Am I supposed to be answering for Bob Lazar, Dancing with Hours? Because all I can say, I've heard mixed reviews about Bob Lazar, and a lot of it was negative. But one thing Bob Lazar had was a Camaro that was modified to run on hydrogen, and the hydrogen tanks he used in it were unique. They did not use compressed hydrogen. It was a tank with a catalyst in it, basically, like a solid material. You can imagine, like, almost like a porous foam, although not necessarily. And when you fill these tanks up with hydrogen, this material, this chemical or foam, bonds with the hydrogen. So the hydrogen atoms or molecules bond with this solid substrate. And this is important because it means that now this Camaro can get into a car accident, could get set on fire, could get hit with a sledgehammer, and it wouldn't necessarily blow up. In fact, it couldn't blow up if you hit it with a sledgehammer. The tanks wouldn't necessarily even leak. And this is because they won't release their hydrogen in these tanks unless they're heated up. So they have a heating element, and when you turn on that heating element, the hydrogen starts to leave the catalyst and become gas, and of course then it comes out of the nozzle. And so you would have like 4 or 5 of these tanks, because let's say each tank is a quarter psi. Let's say you need 1 psi. I'm making up numbers here. So 4 tanks is a quarter psi. So you use all 4 tanks at once to get your quarter psi times 4. And bottom line is that this guy, he's using solar power to get the water to turn into hydrogen, electrolysis. He's pumping that hydrogen into these magical tanks. And his claim in the video I saw was that the material used in these tanks was regulated by the nuclear industry, or by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, because it is used by the nuclear industry. So although these components are not radioactive or anything like that, they are regulated in such a way that they are hard to come by. It's not something that you're going to get, mass produced. So I don't know. That was one thing I just want to, give, in favor of Bob Lazar, that I thought was a kind of a cool thing he was doing. Whether I, believe him and everything else he says, like, he claims that his credentials were wiped out. That is a little trickier, It's like, I don't know if I could buy that. It's like someone must have been in the same college class as him, Find me someone who went to class with him, and if like your records were purged, someone went to class with you. Oh crap, my copy of Dead or Alive is damaged. Anyway, I just found this on my desk. I just saw a chip on the desk while I was like literally looking down, and I was like, oh no. Anyway, I got that for free anyway. But I'm gonna try True Crime out later. But anyway, so with yesterday, tomorrow is yesterday. Yeah, it's interesting. We jumped a lot of places here. Maybe one of these days I have to compile my Star Trek scientific lore. But only thing I would add that is relevant, I wanted to mention earlier, was, you touched upon a lot of it, the naval, connection, so to speak, and the people who designed these things. And when I was a kid, I remember the first time I saw the cutaway poster of the Enterprise. And by the way, this ChatGPT thing, they have these section, not to jump topics, but there's a thing on ChatGPT on the paid version where you click, it says Explore GPTs. And it has dedicated GPTs that are specific to categories. So I typed in Star Trek, and this GPT is a Trek lore master. And so it's sort of like in addition to the normal AI model and what it normally does to search Google and combine that with the results, this one
Hmm.
has research material like Star Trek lore material that it uses and it indexes on its own. So when you ask a question, it's more likely to give you a correct answer about Star Trek related matters. So that's why I did that. That's why I opened up a specific GPT. I didn't just go to the generic chat GPT. I didn't go to Grok. I went to Trek Lore Master GPT in particular. But anyway, what I was saying was when I was a kid, there was a cutaway poster, and I'm going to find that real quick. Oh, was I looking at
I
the right
think I know
page? Make sure
which
you guys
one you're
right
talking
page.
about because
Mm-hmm.
Star Star Trek the official magazine, they had a
Ah.
section in towards the back of the magazine where you could purchase different Star Trek merchandise, autographed pictures, replica props, but they had the cutaway where it showed you where everything was located on the original Enterprise. They also had one for the Enterprise D. Yeah, that's it right there.
This is the one I saw in the catalog when I was a kid, and they had it in the Communicator, the Star Trek fan club magazine, and I saw it at Comic Attitudes in my local mall, the one in the Staten Island mall. And yeah, I was like $14. I saved up, got this poster, love it. I still have it. It's not in the best condition, but a beautiful poster. I got to see if I either can get a good scan of it or buy one and scan it myself, because I feel like this is something that needs to be scanned and preserved properly. And not just for freebies, like, but they're not circulating these anymore, so it's not necessarily infringing on it. But you could just see like this all inspired my imagination here, and the only thing I regret is maybe not learning more about regular rockets back then and not learning more about just naval ships in general, because when you understand like what a Jeffries tube is and the purpose of this design as I remember being conveyed. Now maybe there's another interpretation. Maybe if Baron was here, he might be. I'm sure if Baron was here, he'd be able to bring something additional to the table, no
Mhm.
doubt about it. But of course, it's good to fly solo sometimes. It's good to fly. I'm sure Baron would say, "Fly free with the turtles," or so. I don't know what he was. I'm joking, but I'm sure Baron would
he,
have
he
something funny.
he would definitely joke with you. I know he would.
So like what I remember learning in particular was the idea that, well, the Enterprise, and this is something they violate in later Star Trek. It's not necessarily an egregious violation. I think they balance it, but the outside of the Enterprise, outside of this Daedalus class ship, has smooth everything. Like there's no real, like stuff sticking out. And like even like some people get upset saying, "Oh, Gene Roddenberry said he didn't want to see any fire, fin, or flame." I don't really have a problem with fins. I mean, the shuttlecraft arguably have little fins on the side of them for
Hmm.
aerodynamic, control. But in fact, I think that's where I learned that. Yeah, right over here. Yeah, see this poster's on
Yeah,
my
the
wall, and
Galileo.
it literally shows on the Galileo right here this little thing, and it says aerodynamic something surface. And see, this is what I mean, like by low resolution that we can't see here, but you can see that it's got the surface. It's got. I want to say these are warp nacelles, but they might not be. I'm not 100% on this. Maybe they're
I
capable
don't
of.
know if they were warp capable. I think
Yeah, because
those
like
shuttles were only capable of impulse, but I could be wrong. If someone out there wants to correct me, please go ahead.
because it wouldn't be a stretch to have an impulse nacelle, and um, the thing is that the Bussard collectors are still valuable because Bussard collectors were actually in relation to another type of ship called a Bussard ramjet. And if you
Hmm.
ever, like when I started broadening my horizons a little bit, because at some point I watched Star Trek too many times, I just wanted to explore other stuff. And I know my brother and my mom read some of Larry Niven's work. God, it would have been interesting. The shit I was reading would have been interesting to discuss some of that with her, because like I think she would have had some of the lore in her head about it. Like she wasn't necessarily like a
Yeah.
nerd about it. She probably read the book once, but it was good enough for her to read the whole book once. But like just give you an example, Bussard Ramjet. Like where does the Bussard collector come from? That
Mhm.
is my point here, and this is
Well,
the thing that.
it's funny you bring up how you would go on about it with your family. I had a ninth grade math teacher
Oh, lucky,
back in high
lucky.
school who was a Star Trek fan, and she had a poster that said, "Everything I need to know I learned from Star Trek."
Wow, cool lady right there. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I
she
remember.
was.
Oh, I had it. You just reminded me. I got to see if I can find her. I had a math teacher in she was a math teacher. She was like seventh grade math teacher, and she was a huge Trekkie. Like you could just tell she had that like nerd energy. Sweet lady too, but cool as f. And got along with all the kids. She wasn't just, but like yeah, because I was like I had a teacher who was a Star Trek fan, but he's kind of like elitist. I think because my grades sucked, he didn't want to socialize with me. Probably because I didn't give a shit about the teaching. He was teaching math. He wasn't fun, so I wasn't enjoying it. But this other teacher, she made it fun,
Yep, yep.
and or at least she understood that we don't like math, and she made it tolerable. She really did, and I did better in her class. But a Bussard ramjet in some of these examples, like I'd say the better example is this one here. But really, this cone on the front is what you would use to form a magnetic field. And the thing is that some designs call for a bunch of wires in a conical pattern that go like 100 kilometers out. So it doesn't necessarily have to be visible. It could be an invisible set of wires that have been strung out a great distance. But the key is that there's a magnetic field. As you're traveling through interstellar space, there's going to be hydrogen freely floating around. It may not be a lot of it, but you're going at a high speed. You got a magnetic ram scoop. That's why sometimes they call it Bussard collectors ram scoops. And that's what it's doing. And so this is something that makes sense in a shuttlecraft that, you can, maybe you don't refuel all of your fuel, but you can help to reduce the amount of fuel that you are burning, or at least you can replenish some of the fuel along the way. So this is a very real thing, and I think it is applicable to the example I was going over with the shuttlecraft that
Hmm.
you could benefit from having that. And you know, Galileo 7, we remember like they used the last of their plasma to basically just like use it as a signal flare. But anyway, the Jeffries tube that what I was getting at was the outside of the
Well,
tube.
also think about it too with that nacelle and the Bassard collector on the shuttlecraft. You have to generate power for the environmental systems
Uh
on
huh.
board.
Yep, and that's another thing. It's like so if you can replenish that to keep the people alive. Now in the Galileo 7, they weren't really in a position to do that. They could barely leave the surface of the planet. I don't even know if they
Hmm.
could orbit the planet properly. In fact, yeah, they had enough to and that's accurate because it does take a lot to leave the atmosphere. So the fact that shuttlecraft could go into a decaying orbit under those circumstances and maintain it for as long as it did, that's actually pretty miraculous on its own. Like that's wonder technology for sure.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they weren't in a position to collect more interstellar hydrogen. They weren't going to be spending enough time in space in a place where there was, an ability to move at a velocity while powering that magnetic field. But in the shuttlecraft, you actually see the same thing here. You see a lot of components that can be accessed from the inside. You can access those components in the floor if you need to. You can access the things in the back of the thing. Sure, there's some things you have to access from outside, but like the outside of Enterprise, once again, nothing really sticking out. Just a deflector dish and your warp nacelles, which are kept at a distance because, logically or potentially, you got if you do vent warp plasma, you can have some hazardous stuff coming out near the hull of the ship. So for that reason alone, you want them further away. I'm sure there's a host of other reasons, but the gist of it is that inside that warp nacelle there is indeed a Jeffries tube, and Jeffries tubes in general give you access to all kinds of components of a ship from the inside. And I'd imagine if I understood more about whatever ship that Matt Jeffries was involved in when he
Hmm.
served, I believe Matt Jeffries served in the military or the Navy, that would give me some clues as to why certain decisions are made. You're out at sea, you're out in space, you need to do your maintenance. You don't necessarily, not only because it costs money to film a guy in a spacesuit, it's just practical. Why do you want some poor bastard going outside on the hull of the ship if he doesn't need to be there?
Exactly. But even on Deep Space Nine, there was an episode in one of the later seasons where Cisco's on a runabout and he has going to the Jeffries tube on the runabout to
Uh
conduct
huh.
repairs.
Yep. Yep. I do remember that one too. And that's a great example. It's like this is like so these are the designs that it's like as much as like I loved memorizing the technology and being an expert in all of it, and perhaps someday that'll serve me in some way, but it certainly served me well right now. I'm in good company, but like I think I could have appreciated mathematics a little bit more just by knowing more about rockets. At the time, it just wasn't where it was at. Like, yeah, rockets are cool, but I'm like understanding a rocket is not captivating my imagination like the Enterprise does.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it just doesn't. It just didn't do it for
And
me.
speaking for myself, math was never really one of my strong subjects.
Hmm. And I don't think the teachers were strong at math half the time. I think like I talked about that rocket equation before, and look, from what I understand now, a rocket scientist versus a rocket engineer. Rocket science is the easy part. Granted, I'm not saying the math is a cakewalk, but a lot less trial and error in getting the math right. Assuming that the rocket engineer can build the thing to the specs, you can do the math on it. Once you have specs on paper, the math is easy, or at least that you. It's a matter of plugging in numbers into formulas. But you get what I'm saying, the plural of formula, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's fascinating to me because like it sounds insurmountable to do the math, but it's really not that bad. If you ever played Kerbal Space Program, you get to like kind of finagle things a lot. You know, you get to for example, even in Space Engine, like I use this app called Space Engine, and one of the things is like to orbit any planet, essentially, like you need to move at a certain speed. So when I'm first spawning a ship, it falls down towards the planet. And if I want it to not fall down, I can either expend fuel going straight up, or I can go kind of horizontally and like Newton's cannonball. You're gonna always fall beyond the horizon, so to speak. And this is like a principle that I wish a math teacher showed this to me when I was a kid, like saying, "Look, this is rocket science 101," and maybe I would have gotten interested. I mean, you can just see on the most basic level, a rocket brings the rocket up and then it starts traveling horizontally. And that's similar to taking a really tall mountain and firing a cannon. And with low energy, that cannonball, oh, what the hell happened there? That cannonball falls down very early when you use low energy, or if you use a little more of a powder charge, because that's how cannons work. They put powder in the back of the round. It goes to point B. But if you shoot a cannon hard enough at that high altitude, or if you accelerate a vehicle to a high enough speed, essentially instead of falling down and hitting the ground here, it'll miss the ground. But the beauty of it is it'll keep missing the ground, and that's sort of why, from what I can figure, that's how I conceptualize free fall. And I didn't really understand why they called it free fall until I saw this, or saw this, this conceptualization of
Yeah.
how rockets are supposed to work. And it's simplistic Newtonian mechanics, but the Newtonian mechanics work, at least within the solar system. They work as you start trying to calculate like what stars are doing on a galactic level, and that's a whole other ball game. And
Yeah, that's a
they're
whole
still
different animal right there.
yeah, they're still kind of reconciling it. You got people debating dark matter. Is it real? What is it? What isn't it? And, from what I can figure, dark matter is like a placeholder in the equations, because you were able to get the equations to work when you plug in dark matter. So, these are things that we don't get to appreciate as much in Star Trek. But one thing about Star Trek is that, like, while I just mentioned, like, I could use brute force to keep myself in orbit, I have unlimited fuel. In real life, you got to do the math because you don't have unlimited fuel. You got to figure out when are you going to burn your engines, at what points in time, at what locations to get a desired effect. Just like the Voyager probe is being sent towards particular planets to get gravity assists. Sometimes we'd send planets towards like Venus to get a gravity assist to go further out without
Hmm.
sending them up with more fuel. So same principle is like this
Using the
reason why.
slingshot effect is
Yeah,
essentially what they're
exactly.
using.
And I gotta credit the movie Apollo 13 for getting that into my head at a young age.
Mhm.
Because in the movie Apollo 13, they have this problem. Like, so what can we do to get these men in these men back? And it was basically like one smart guy goes, well, look, they're already going towards the moon. Just instead of landing, have them slingshot around the far side of the moon, and that will give them a gravitational assist that will give them enough momentum to come back. If you don't do the slingshot, you could, kill your acceleration, or even enter into an orbit and then accelerate out of orbit. But they couldn't count on that at the time. They really couldn't count on their normal engines. In the movie Apollo 13, they don't even use the normal engines. They use the
No.
landing engine on the lunar lander, which is not supposed to be, not supposed to be used for that purpose. That engine is supposed to be, like that thing is supposed to stay on the ground when it does its thing. So like we see like in this schematic here, this here, this bottom half or this left half here, that stays on the lunar surface. Only this piece here goes to space, and then you would use the engine on this cone here. But in Apollo 13, they had a component explode over here. Basically, a tank of oxygen, or oxygen tank blew up in the side of this. So now you don't really have that ability to run life support or mix enough hydrogen and oxygen to accelerate to the speed. So then that's when they had to be clever, and basically they eyeball it. The guy's literally looking out the window on the lunar lander, and they're essentially practically using a ruler to just kind of say, okay, you got to get it between this notch and that notch, and they
No
virtually,
margin for error.
yeah. Well, fortunately, there was some margin for error. Thank God. You know what I mean? But you're right. Like in the context of like generally in this context, the man controlling that joystick, yeah, it's best to think no margin for error because you really don't have much. What margin for error you have, it's like you can't count on it. You really got to just assume because even when you do everything right, things can go wrong. You know, I mean, especially like the way they were maneuvering, it was very, very janky what they did, but it worked. And I love that movie because it's a very real case study. You know, it's a very real example. But just for reference, I'm talking about the they call it the ascent stage. And so, or descent stage. So the descent stage is everything that's covered in mylar blanket down here, and this gray stuff, and that's got an engine in there for landing. Now, in fact, I stand corrected. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. This part, oh, how did they do it? Holy cow! Okay, maybe they did use this engine. Okay, now I'm having a flashback. I'm mixing up my components here because this has an engine you give throttle for landing. This has an engine that runs once. This is a one-time engine. So when they eject this off the bottom piece here, it looks like it's ejecting like almost like an explosive bolt, but what's really happening is they have a type of engine like, remember the movie Die Hard 3?
Yeah.
Okay, so the thing that Jeremy Irons built where you mix the two chemicals and Newman from Seinfeld blows up a desk in the NYPD office. Remember, he's like, yeah, he's like going, oh, see, it does nothing. And then he does this, and the desk falls apart, and the lady's like, oh, wow, yo, that's so loud. Well, that's what's happening in the top part of the ascent stage. It's using hypergolic propellant. Basically, it's like the first German rocket plane where you mix two types of fuel, an oxidizer and a fuel. Whatever they are, these are very corrosive chemicals. And just by virtue of them mixing with each other, they immediately ignite for all intents and purposes. And so this is good because you want a simple design. This is an engine where they want it to work. They don't want to have any additional moving parts. They just want to get off the surface of the moon, and so I don't remember if they used that engine or the throttleable engine, but actually I think it's coming back to me now. It had to be the bottom engine because you want to be able to control your throttle. That's how you narrow that margin of error, or that's how how you stay within what little margin for error that you might have. I said it's a big maybe. So if I remember correctly, they were using the engine and the thrusters on this. I don't even think they were using the thrusters on the main craft, and that's what made it a really, really wild hack. Because they couldn't use anything in the cylindrical part. That's the service module, and that's normally your air, water, and electricity. But they basically had to conserve that electricity to ensure that the batteries were charged for the final landing. And so yeah. So anyway, I mean that's a little off topic there, but bottom line is, I enjoyed the episode. It's definitely like like I think a simpler one to stomach. Like it's like definitely not like, I don't know if there's a whole lot of deepness going there aside from the side topics that we've managed to bring up. And I mean, granted, time travel is a huge one, and I don't know how common time travel. This is another Barron thing. He probably is reading fanzines, magazines with short stories and things like that probably cover time travel to some extent. But in general, this wasn't very well treaded on ground. Yes, we had that book, The Time Machine, and there were some interesting concepts there, but nothing where it's like a localized thing where people who are familiar with each other's timelines are going back in time, or in particular, people of the future, they at least know what was going on in our past. So when they got brought back in time, they knew where they were. It's not like certain stories where you go to the far future and it's got that mystique that definitely captivates the imagination, and it leaves a lot of room for creativity because of the unknown if you go 1,000 or 10,000 years in the future. But, I think Star Trek is where we begin to see some story where people from a relatively near future, humans who are fairly familiar to the humans that we know today, are,
well, one of the reasons being is you also have ship's historians on board starships during that time. And in the time of the Next Generation, yes, they still have ship's historians, but they also have plenty of captain's logs, sensor logs, data logs from other crews that have traveled back through time. And it becomes one of the major courses of Starfleet Academy is time travel. temporal
Mhm.
investigations comes about. These are the temporal prime directives: what you do, what you don't, what you avoid at all costs.
Mhm. The do's and the do nots.
Hmm.
And so one other thing I did notice is it's a good question. Yes, hydrogen, make it so. Picard said, I can't do a good Picard, but yes, I know I'm trying to do my Picard voice. But anyway, it says, yes, hydrogen, make it so. But we blew up a nuke in space. Did that damage anything? Well, when we did testing, I believe it was called Operation Fishbowl back in the 50s or 60s. In particular, I think both us and the Russians did similar. And at one point, it did disrupt many communication satellites of that era. It disrupted the power grid in Hawaii at the time. So, that was because of the EMP. But depending on the
Hmm.
altitude and the proximity where you do it, you can do it in a relative safe manner. What made that operation most interesting was how it helped us to map our ionosphere. So, when you deposit radiation of a known type into that area, now when you use satellites to detect the types of charged particles following the ionosphere, following the Earth's magnetic field, we found that okay, we have a difference, and the type of radiation from the nuke is following these magnetic lines, and they were able to figure out where the magnetic field lines were
Hmm.
for the Earth's magnetic field to map it, and that's vital because I mean, as we get into space exploration, we're learning okay, the International Space Station is still under relatively protected by the magnetic envelope of our magnetic field. It's still up there. It's not, there's no atmosphere really, or no, atmosphere at that altitude is measured in parts per million. So while some people get into semantics saying, oh, well, the scientists said there's an atmosphere there. It's like, well, yes and no. But, for all intents and purposes, does it matter? If it's measured in parts per million, is it really an atmosphere, For my purposes, no. For breathing the air, I mean. Um, but essentially, these are things that Star Trek deals with the magnetic fields. These are things that we have to solve. And with Mars, I would say it's simple as living underground. My biggest concern with Mars is they should have just maybe practiced on the moon first. I get it. Reach for the stars and you'll at least make it to the moon. Maybe reach for the moon and you'll make it. Reach for Mars and you'll make it to the moon, perhaps. But um, you're 6 months, 2 months away from help. So on the moon, if something goes wrong, especially if they build the lunar gateway and there's commercial ventures investing, we might get commercial industry on the moon overnight in the next 10 years. And if that happens, that would be wonderful. But
Hmm.
having a small space station means at least if something bad happens, either help could be sent or supplies could be dropped. Maybe like, okay, well, what's the nature of your problem? Oh, my radio is broken. Please call for help. And it's like, okay, good. The space station is going to have a long range transmitter. So the guys on the
Hmm.
ground can at least do that. So I don't know. There's a lot of potential. I look forward to seeing what that holds. And as for Star Trek, perhaps someone will, like you say, bring back Star Trek in a good way. Like I'm not counting on things coming back per se, but like I almost saw it. It's like what was it? The cartoon one. Well, one
The
Prodigy
animated
had.
series.
Yeah, the animated series was well executed, but the other one, the newest one, the freaking one with Boing Love,
Prodigy, yeah.
not
Oh,
that
no,
one
no, no.
too.
Lower Decks. That was Lower
Yeah,
Decks.
Lower Decks. So Lower Decks, I look, I know it's doofy, and I know there's certain things like the way they did the Naked Time episode that are egregious, but they at least look like they were trying to match the aesthetic. Like really, like I see ships that look like this. I'm like, that's already
Hmm.
progress right there compared to what I've been seeing the past 10 years, 15 years. And so that alone, it's like, okay, they're wearing the right type of uniform, more or less. It's like the concept of second contact instead of first contact is like a very real thing. Like this is the hard work. It's not as glamorous, but you have to iron out a lot of diplomatic shit after
Yeah.
first contact.
Well, I was reading when it came to Lower Decks, the uniforms that they have in that animated series were more inspired by the original uniforms they were going to use in Generations before they decided we're going back to the ones that we used on the TV series and also Deep Space Nine. Because when they saw those uniforms that they came up with, and if you anybody out there, if you purchased any of the Playmates Generations figures, that's what the uniforms were supposed to look like for
Oh,
Generations.
that's what those.
But
That's what
that,
that's about. Oh,
yeah,
okay. I
yeah.
didn't know that.
But
Okay.
apparently, when they filmed it and they saw them in actual use, they didn't like it. So they said, okay, we're going back to the series uniforms, both Deep Space Nine and Voyager. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe Jonathan Frakes wore Avery Brooks' uniform,
Yeah, I think I heard that too.
and LeVar Burton wore Colmini's uniform from Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like I can almost see it. Like it doesn't seem like it would be bad, but I guess it once you're on camera, and there might be a deleted scenes reel because I know sometimes you'll find these deleted scenes reels where like in fact, I think the scene where Captain Kirk re-enters the atmosphere in a skydiving suit is in
Mm-hmm.
a YouTube video. That's there, so that's one of them. But it almost looks like one of the things they did was like I love the double standards. Like, I don't want to sound like a third wave feminist here, but sometimes people will point out like how like the men have these nice baggy uniforms and the women on the original the early Next Generation episodes are wearing these super tight spandexes. And from my point of view, heck yeah. And I'm sure some women are perfectly happy to show their beauty too. Like it's not about sexualization. It's just like I'm a beautiful woman. I'm young. I'm beautiful, and I want to be. I'm not me personally. I'm saying if I was in the body of a woman. I mean, I'm speaking for women.
I know what you're saying.
I'm
You
digging
know,
a hole here. No, but jokes aside.
people who are confident in themselves, comfortable in their own bodies, will
Hmm.
dress a certain way.
Now that being said, what jumps out at me is granted these are just action figures, but it almost looks like they're going for like the girdle or bustier type design where it pulls in to make that hourglass figure, and then regardless of whether or not that was part of the actual uniform design, I just see like only the women have the green or the colored boobs over here. See this like whatever you call it, the breast. I guess that's technically the breast. I mean, in terms of like if designing clothing, breast pocket, but I could see where like maybe they were trying to go for that flashy look for the movie, the big
Hmm.
screen, just like
Well,
how performers would do that
well,
too.
just like the original series movies, you had the ones for the
Hmm.
motion pictures, and then you had the Monster Maroons that were
Yep.
introduced in Star Trek Two.
Oh yeah, and I those uniforms. I mean, those are true naval style uniforms. But speaking of naval, that's the last thing I want to say before is like just like uniforms, like the wool. Why you use wool? And I remember Worf remarking on Rise, they're like, "Oh, Starfleet uniforms are designed to be comfortable in a range of temperatures." When Dax is like, "Put on some shorts, honey," and he's like, "No, I'm gonna wear this uniform. I'm gonna be a
Hmm.
Buzz Killington." But but like the thing is that all of these smooth surfaces, yeah, everything accessible on the inside. Um, I think we mostly covered that, but yeah, I thought I forgot something. No, we covered that already. Okay, good, we're good. Yeah, we covered a lot of ground here today, man. Mike, thank you for letting me, just kind of jump around a little bit there.
No, no
Sometimes
problem, no problem, brother. You're the guest, and I'd rather us spend time talking about good Star Trek and actual science and theories that have been you know debated for years, and that's what we
mm-hmm.
did tonight. This is what a Star Trek discussion is about. The Adventure Continues. A Star Trek discussion is about us fans coming together and talking about good stuff.
And that's exactly, yeah, that's why I'm here. I knew I can count on that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
no, you never disappoint, Mike.
Well, my goal for this was to make sure it didn't turn into pop talk. I don't want the adventure continues to become pop talk. Pop talk, it's its own thing. Nothing against pop talk. I
I
enjoy doing
tremendously
pop
enjoy,
talk.
but yeah, it's good to segregate your shows, to have different formats. And plus, maybe one crowd prefers a different style show, and you might figure
Hmm.
out as this goes along, in my opinion, you might figure out that some people do lean towards watching this more, or what I mean, like some people will like this show, and other people will gravitate to pop talk, and you have like groups of overlapping people, and you have groups of people who only watch or
Hmm.
prefer one or the other. So that could be interesting to see how this develops. I think I like this format. I like the idea of just watching the episode, discussing it, and then like some episodes, like you could save, like time. Like really, the 8 to 10 p.m. thing is actually pretty logical timing. Like you could pretty much get most discussion done in that time frame. So let's say you were like, I gotta go to bed. I got work in the
Hmm.
morning. You could wrap this up at 10 on a dot, and I don't think anybody would be missing anything.
No,
So
the
yeah.
the only exceptions to that 8 to 10 time slot. I mean, I know we've gone over that tonight, and that's okay. That's okay. We've had a great time, and you gotta recognize when you're having a great time. But the only time that we actually go past that 8 to 10 time slot is when we're watching episodes that originally aired as 2-hour episodes. When you look at Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, or if we're talking about one of the movies.
Hmm. Oh yeah, that's a given. Yeah, at that point, you're gonna definitely go. Yeah, you got to take that into account. Otherwise you're rushing through very little.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And yes, I know some could go ahead and say, Mike, as far as the movies, are you going to watch The Wrath of Khan even though you did it last year on Pop Talk? Yes. On here, we will watch The Wrath of Khan again. It'll be the director's cut again.
That's a good choice. Yeah.
And Anonymous says, I'm going to talk for 10 minutes, so it's going to be an early night. Oh, I'm sure you'll come up with things to say, Anonymous.
Do, 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 do.
Do, 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 do. But DJ, I want to thank you for coming on tonight, taking time out of your Saturday night to do this, and you know, be part of this new adventure here on
Mhm.
Pacific Forum for this bi-weekly adventure. And at this time, if you would, please let everybody know who you are, what you're doing, and when they can find you.
Well, first of all, I am DJ Ronnie G. You can also call me Ron. What I'm doing, I'm turning my head like this because apparently the Bluetooth signal on these headsets clips out sometimes when I do this, and only when I'm using my second mouse. Beyond, what else am I doing? Well, on Thursdays, I do the Monday show on a Thursday. And, I did that because I used to do a Monday show to keep myself consistent, and I decided to move it to Thursday so that I could sleep on a work night because I work on Tuesday. And to avoid confusion, I continue to call it the Monday show on Thursday. So as I hope it does, it does what it does, right? But jokes aside, sometimes I show my turtles. At some point, maybe I will edit a video showing you how I take care of my turtles properly, because I do record footage sometimes of me just doing routine maintenance and narrating over it. But sometimes you don't want to just upload a raw upload. Sometimes you want to just splice certain things together, do it nice and neat. I play games. I play Star Wars games sometimes, like Low Spec Linux Gaming does. Recently, I played Free Space 2. In fact, a good friend of mine put me on to that, and that game was cool, yo. Another content creator, VTuber from the Philippines, LCX, was giving me a lore dump on freaking Free Space 2, and
Okay.
it's a bit like Babylon 5 in how the ships have hyperdrives, but they also rely on jump gates, and the jump gates serve as beacons. And at one point in a war, they are destroying jump gates to prevent the bad guys, so to speak, from following. Because if you destroy jump gates, the enemy is now stuck at another star system for so many light years that it gives you time to plan something, to build a new fleet, to build up your fleet, or whatever you got to do. So yeah, that game was cool. I had a hard time operating the keyboard and the mouse. I believe that you're supposed to be able to do it purely with the keyboard, but I may stream that game again next week because I think as I play that game, I'll get better at it. And
Okay.
so my last stream, I was a rookie pilot. Next stream, maybe I'll be a better pilot. But anyway, stay tuned. I do random stuff. And finally, just talking about random space stuff. You saw a glimpse of that during today's show with me and Mike talking about, things like relativity and whatnot. And sometimes I do very real science. And although I'm not a professional astronomer, um, I collect raw data. I have an automated imaging workflow where I can collect, red, green, and blue data using a monochrome camera, which is a black and white camera. I can take color pictures using a black and white camera in the very similar way that the Hubble Space Telescope does it. And none of these images here do justice. These are like rough cuts over here, but still, the fact that you get, train a telescope on something, keep the shutter open for 5 minutes, and have a motorized mount tracking the target to counteract the Earth's rotation and end up with this. I think it's just cool. I think it's cool, and I find that part rewarding alone. And sometimes when I buck down and do the image processing, and I put the raw data together, because one astro image is not a single picture. Oftentimes you got to take dozens of pictures of the
Mm-hmm.
same object and then stack those frames together just to eke out more detail and contrast. Because from one picture to another, I might have some sky glow. Maybe the background turns a little gray, and in the next picture, a meteorite or airplane might pass by. And what's interesting is I could still stack that picture together with the rest of them. It's just a matter of like making sure that the rest of the images can average it out. So I'm learning. I sometimes share a little bit what I'm learning. I try to share a little background, maybe more than is necessary sometimes. But sometimes I don't want to just show you a picture, especially if it's incomplete. I want to explain why is it incomplete and how did we get to this point, and how do we get to the point where we have a final product. So as I go along, if I have anything beautiful to share, you bet yet. But I will be posting that. And so, with that being said, I can be found on my channel, DJ Ronnie G on YouTube. You can literally do the link that Mike already posted in the chat. It's very simple, as you can see. It's just youtube.com/@symbol DJ Ronnie G. So easy peasy, easy to subscribe if you're interested. And that's it. And once again, thank you for watching me, people in the chat, and thank you, Mike, for having me.
Not a problem. And please do subscribe to DJ Ronnie G. He's a great person. I've got to know him over the years, and I consider him a very good member of the Pacific 4 and 4 family because he's become a friend.
Same.
And before I promote what's coming up on the YouTube channel and Rumble channel for this week, I do want to thank Dances with Owls for being here, and you're most certainly welcome. Again, this is a stream I had been thinking about wanting to do for quite some time, and I've had to really sit down and think. All right, Mike, how do you want to do this? You don't want it to be Pop Talk. You want Pop Talk to be its thing, and how are you going to make this news stream its own thing? Just like you try to make your game streams their own thing. And nothing against anybody out there who has done their episode reviews. They're doing it your way. But I was thinking, how am I going to differentiate myself from everyone else as far as doing this? And that's when I decided, okay, well, not only watch the episodes as we're discussing it, but we're going to watch specific episodes, specific movies. And we're going to talk about it the whole time as we watch it. But we're going to share it with an audience so the audience can chime in. And also, I know with everybody's busy schedule, it would be hard for folks to sit down one night and watch a specific episode, then try to recall everything they saw verbatim. I mean, you heard DJ Ronnie G and myself tonight. So many Star Trek episodes, 735 episodes from 66 to 2005 that you're trying to recall as accurate as you can, but with all those episodes, you might make a mistake. I've done it. I'm not perfect.
Oh, I literally did it at the beginning of this episode. I literally referenced Gary 7 while talking about this episode because they went back in time, and I'm just fusing these episodes together.
Well, that's the thing too, DJ. I mean, how many times have we talked as fans say, the one that they went back in time? Well, which episode? I mean, there's this episode from the original series. There's several episodes in Next Generation. So, with this, again, I just want to have it as an experience where everybody can participate and enjoy and put in their 2 cents. And show that Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek isn't dead. We can still find things about it that we enjoy. And perhaps introduce someone to Star Trek and help them fall in love with the franchise that we all love. And you have a good night too, Dances with Owls. Great to have you here. And yes, see you in 2 weeks. Yes, in 2 weeks, the next episode of The Adventure Continues, a Star Trek discussion, will be with Anonymous, who is here tonight. And we will be talking about the Season 2 episode, Paradise. It was actually episode number 15 from season 2 of Deep Space Nine. And that's a very good episode. And I'll get into more of it, but I remember when I first saw the episode as a teenager. I did not like the episode. Now, I see it from a different perspective, but I'll get more into that when Anonymous joins me in 2 weeks at 8 p.m. Eastern for episode 3. And of course, I want to thank Admiral Lady Mist. Thank you, Lady Mist, for being here. Pleasure having you here as always. And of course, Anonymous. Oh, it's good to have you here, brother. And as I scroll up here, because I don't want to miss anybody, of course, I do want to thank you again, DJ, for being aboard the Starship Pacific 4 and 4 for tonight's episode. So thank you again, brother.
It is an honor.
And as I scroll up here, I know, and there he is. Padawannabe, thank you very much for watching, listening, and also sending that picture in Discord with that Lego model of the Enterprise. And let's see. Let's scroll up here. We also had Tim, also known as FKHC 2005. Thank you, Tim, and also thank you for posting that image on the Cosme side, brother. Really appreciate it. Speaking of Cosme, I have been checking for any messages over there. I just want to make sure. And no, there were no new messages, so good. I didn't miss out on anything over there.
Oh yeah, and if you want a copy of that Katy Perry animation I have there, I have a higher quality version of it now. I can send you.
I don't know, DJ. I think on Pop Talk I would just be a smart aleck about it.
Yeah,
and see that's another thing about this particular live stream. This is a live stream where I'm really trying not to curse like I do on Pop Talk.
Okay.
I don't care if someone does it. I'm just trying to do it for myself. Again, trying to differentiate it from Pop Talk, where I curse like a sailor. You've heard me during a game stream. I curse like a sailor. So,
yep, especially game streams.
it's a personal choice.
Absolutely.
And it was great to see Leia Rose. I hope you're doing well. And let's see. I just want to make sure I don't miss anybody. And that looks like it was everybody. Let me just check and see if there are any messages. Okay. Exactly, Anonymous. Exactly. That episode does have layers. But everybody, as far as what's coming up on the channel for this new week, which I will post the schedule tonight and tomorrow, and what I mean by tonight and tomorrow is X and YouTube users will see it tonight, and then everybody else on the other platforms I'm on will get it tomorrow. But I'll post the schedule, and for Tuesday I'll be playing more Rise of the Ronin, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And of course, tomorrow's Pop Talk will be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on both YouTube and Rumble. And it will be a double feature watch party with Galaxy Quest. How appropriate. The best Star Trek movie, according to some, even though it's not a Star Trek movie. But we'll be watching Galaxy Quest as our first movie, and then we'll be watching one of my personal favorite comedies, Tommy Boy, with Chris Farley and David Spade, as our second movie, starting tomorrow. And of course, I already mentioned Rise of the Ronin for Tuesday. Wednesday, we'll definitely be talking about news topics that have come out for the new week that we want to discuss, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then Thursday, well, I figured, why not try it again with the MLB The Show and Marvel Rivals stream again. So I'll be doing that again this Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. So that is what will be coming up on the channel. And again, Thank you, everybody, for being here. Good night to you, Lady Miss. Thank you
Mhm.
for your support of the channel. Thank you, everybody, for your support of the channel, whether you were watching on YouTube, Rumble, or X. Thank you so much, everybody.
Indeed. Thank you all.
Yes, this is a lot of fun, and I hope that in the future many more will be a part of it. So
Mhm.
you know the saying here on Pacific 414, and if you don't, you're hearing it for the first time. Don't ever give up on me in a game, because just when you do, you might miss something. Live long and prosper.